If you can play Chopin's Nocturne in C minor, I'll marry you on the spot. Victoria Reynolds didn't look up from her phone when she said it. Her heels echoed across the marble floor of Reynolds Records' corporate lobby, the only sound aside from the faint whir of a floor buffer in the distance. The janitor, broad-shouldered, quiet, late 40s, paused his cleaning. Still crouched in front of the grand piano that sat like a relic at the heart of the building's glass and steel atrium, he was polishing its legs with a care that made it seem like a sacred artifact rather than office decor. She finally glanced up. "You hear me?" The man looked at her then, his eyes a strange shade between gray and green, clear, unreadable. He stood slowly, one hand still resting lightly on the piano bench. "I heard you," he said, voice calm. "But that's not a piece you play because someone dares you." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "So you do know the piece?" He didn't answer, just returned to his work, folding the cloth in his palm with the same precision as if he were folding a flag. Victoria studied him a moment longer, then gave a soft scoff and turned on her heel. "Didn't think so." She didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was the silence of another late night in the building she ran, but didn't belong to. Maybe it was the absurd romance of the polished piano gleaming under pendant lights no one ever noticed. Or maybe it was the way the janitor had looked at the piano, not as an object to be cleaned, but as something remembered. Either way, the moment was over. She stepped into the elevator, swiped her badge, and disappeared into the belly of her kingdom. By the time Jack Thompson finished wiping the last fingerprint from the black lacquered lid, the building had gone completely still. He looked around once, then slid onto the bench. His fingers hovered over the keys, not pressing, just resting as if trying to recall where they'd last belonged. He didn't play. He just sat there, eyes closed, listening to the silence. A silence shaped like memories he hadn't touched in years. The next morning, Victoria's assistant handed her a report and a coffee and launched into a rundown of the day's agenda. But Victoria wasn't listening. Her eyes were drawn across the glass to the piano in the lobby, where a faint smudge on the lid, impossibly faint, caught the light. She remembered his hand resting there, the stillness in his eyes. "Jennifer?" she said, interrupting her assistant mid-sentence. "Who's the overnight janitor?" Jennifer blinked. Jack Thompson works third shift, started 6 months ago." "Why?" Victoria didn't answer. She just stared at the piano a second longer, then turned to her schedule like nothing had happened. Jack Thompson's apartment was nothing special. A modest two-bedroom on the outskirts of the city where rent was still somewhat reasonable. The walls were thin, the appliances outdated, but it was immaculately clean. A man who spent his nights scrubbing other people's spaces couldn't bear to live in disorder himself. "Dad, I can't find my music theory book." Lily's voice carried from her bedroom, a small space painted in soft blues at her request 3 years ago. Jack glanced up from the stove where he was preparing a simple breakfast. "Check under your bed, next to your science project," he called back, flipping an egg with practiced precision. At 13, Lily Thompson had her father's eyes and her mother's smile. A delicate girl with a fierce spirit, she moved through the world with a quiet determination that both worried and inspired Jack. The heart condition she'd inherited from her mother meant frequent doctor visits, medications, and limitations that no child should have to endure. Yet she rarely complained. She appeared in the doorway, triumphantly holding up a worn textbook. "Found it," Jack smiled, sliding the eggs onto 2 plates. "Just in time. Breakfast, then pills, then school. Dr. Collins wants to see those practice sheets today." Lily sat at their small kitchen table, already set with orange juice and toast. "Dad, Miss Garcia says I could try for the youth orchestra next fall if my condition stabilizes." Jack's hand paused briefly as he placed her plate in front of her. That's wonderful, sweetheart. But let's see what Dr. Collins says today, okay? One step at a time." "You always say that," she sighed, but without real frustration. She'd grown accustomed to the careful way her father approached her dreams, never dismissing them, but never encouraging flights of fancy that might end in disappointment. "Because it's always true," he replied gently. "Eat up, the bus won't wait." As they ate, Jack glanced at the stack of medical bills on the counter, partially hidden behind a fruit bowl. The insurance covered most of it, but most still left thousands that stretched his janitor's salary to the breaking point. He'd picked up weekend work at the Highland Community Center teaching basic piano to kids, but it was barely enough to keep them afloat. "You're doing that thing with your forehead again," Lily said, interrupting his thoughts. "What thing?" "The worry wrinkle thing." She pointed to her own smooth forehead and furrowed it dramatically. "You look like an old map when you do that." Jack laughed despite himself. "Thanks for that assessment. Very flattering." "Just saying." She popped the last bite of toast into her mouth. "Mrs. Patel next door says you're too young to look so old. She says you need a girlfriend." "Mrs. Patel should mind her own business," Jack replied, though without heat. "And you need to brush your teeth or you'll miss the bus." As Lily disappeared into the bathroom, Jack allowed himself one moment, just one, of bone-deep exhaustion. Then he straightened, cleared the plates, and prepared for another day of keeping all the balls in the air. He'd been doing it for 15 years since Sarah died. One more day wouldn't kill him. In the polished corner office on the 42nd floor of Reynolds Records, Victoria Reynolds sat alone reviewing quarterly projections with the focus of a surgeon. At 45, she had built herself into the image of corporate perfection. Sharp suits, sharper mind, and a reputation for being brilliantly ruthless when necessary. The office around her was a testament to modern power. Glass, steel, and breathtaking views of the city. Awards and accolades lined one wall, while another displayed vintage album covers from the label's legendary artists. In the center of it all sat Victoria, alone with spreadsheets and strategy documents. A knock at the door preceded Frank Porter, the company's 53-year-old vice president and her father's oldest friend. He entered without waiting for a response, one of the many small ways he undermined her authority. "The streaming numbers for the Newton album are disappointing," he announced, settling into a chair across from her desk uninvited. "The board's not happy." Victoria didn't look up. "The board's never happy, Frank. And the Newton album was your pet project, if I recall correctly." Frank's smile remained fixed. "We all share responsibility for the company's performance, Victoria. Your father understood that." The mention of her father, William Reynolds, the legendary music producer who had built Reynolds Records from nothing, was deliberate. Frank had been dropping his name with increasing frequency in recent months, a subtle reminder that Victoria's position as CEO was viewed by many as an inheritance rather than something earned. "My father also understood that not every album breaks records," she replied coolly. "The Mateo signing is promising. Early indicators suggest—" "The board is considering options," Frank interrupted. "Streaming is changing everything. The old models don't work anymore." "By options, you mean selling?" Victoria finally looked up, her gaze direct. "To Meridian Global, I presume?" Frank didn't deny it. "They've made an excellent offer. The shareholders would see a 30% premium. And you'd see a very comfortable consulting position." "No doubt." Victoria closed her laptop. "This company isn't for sale, Frank. Not while I'm CEO." "That's the thing about being CEO, Victoria." Frank stood, straightening his designer tie. "It's not always a permanent position." After he left, Victoria walked to the window, staring out at the city below. The Steinway in the lobby had been her father's, a 1932 Model D that he'd restored himself and kept in his home studio for decades. When they built this building 15 years ago, he'd insisted it be placed in the lobby, not as decoration, but as a reminder of why they were all there: for the music. Victoria hadn't touched a piano since she was 12 years old, the night her father had told her she would never be good enough to play professionally. "Don't waste your time, Victoria," he'd said after her recital. "You have a good business mind. Use it." She'd closed the piano lid that night and never opened it again. She'd become exactly what he wanted, the perfect business mind to lead his company. And now, decades later, she found herself thinking about the janitor with the knowing eyes who treated her father's piano with more reverence than she had in years. The Highland Community Center hummed with activity even on a Wednesday afternoon. Jack led Lily through the crowded hallway, nodding to familiar faces as they made their way to practice room C. "Dad, I can go by myself," Lily protested, though without much conviction. "I'm not a baby." "I know," Jack replied, shifting his worn backpack containing sheet music. "But I've got my own class in 20 minutes, so we're headed the same way." The truth was, Jack rarely let Lily out of his sight when they were at the center. Her condition meant she could have an episode at any time, and the thought of her alone and struggling for breath kept him vigilant to the point of hovering. He was working on it, but today wasn't the day to practice letting go. Inside the small practice room, a battered upright piano sat against one wall. Lily settled on the bench, her fingers automatically finding middle C. "Remember 30 minutes max," Jack reminded her. "If you feel any chest pain or dizziness, stop immediately, sit down and call you," Lily finished, rolling her eyes. "I know, Dad. Same as the last 100 times." Jack smiled, his worry softening at her familiar exasperation. "Smart Alec. I'll be in room E if you need me." He lingered in the doorway a moment, watching as she opened her music book and began playing a simple Clementi sonatina. Her form was good, better than he'd taught her. Miss Garcia, her music teacher at school, had clearly been working with her. The thought brought both pride and an unexpected pang. There had been a time when he would have been the one to teach her these techniques, to show her how to bring out the melody while keeping the accompaniment balanced. But that was another life. Before Sarah's illness, before hospital bills and overnight cleaning shifts, and the weight of single parenthood. Before he packed away his own dreams to ensure Lily could have hers. He turned away, heading for room E, where 5 neighborhood kids waited for their beginner piano lesson. This was his life now, cleaning by night, teaching basics by day, being Lily's father every moment in between. It was enough. It had to be. Victoria stayed late at the office that night, well past the time when the last executive had left and the cleaning crew had come and gone. Only the security guards remained, stationed in the lobby and making periodic rounds. She wasn't working, though her laptop was open in front of her. Instead, she was sitting in the dim light of her office, staring out at the city lights, her mind circling back to the strange encounter with the janitor. Something about him nagged at her, the way he held himself, perhaps, or the confidence in his reply. Janitors didn't typically respond to executives that way, especially not to the CEO. There was no deference in his tone, no awkwardness, just that calm statement. "That's not a piece you play because someone dares you." It was the kind of thing her father might have said. On impulse, she closed her laptop and rode the elevator down to the lobby. The night security guard, an older man named Joe, nodded to her from his desk. "Working late again, Miss Reynolds?" "Something like that, Joe," she replied. "Has the janitor been through yet? Thompson, I think?" Joe checked his clipboard. "Jack? Yeah, he started on the executive floor about an hour ago. Should be working his way down." Victoria nodded, stepping toward the elevator again. Then she paused. "How long has he been with us?" "About 6 months," Joe replied. "Good worker. Quiet type." "And before that?" Joe shrugged. "Don't know much about him, to be honest. Keeps to himself. Has a daughter he's raising alone, I know that much. Seems like a good father from what he says." Victoria pressed the button for the 42nd floor, her curiosity only deepening. As the elevator ascended, she considered what she was doing. Going to find the janitor who had intrigued her? It was unlike her. Frank would have a field day if he knew. The executive floor was dimly lit, with only security lights illuminating the hallway. Victoria moved quietly, listening for the sounds of cleaning equipment. She heard nothing at first. Then, as she rounded the corner toward the conference rooms, the faint notes of a piano drifted through the air. Victoria froze. The company had a small upright in the executive lounge, a modern Yamaha, nothing special, used occasionally for entertainment at office parties. But the sound coming from it now was anything but ordinary. The notes of Chopin's Nocturne in C minor floated through the empty hallway, played with such precision and feeling that Victoria found herself holding her breath. She moved silently toward the sound, stopping in the doorway of the lounge. There, in the dimly lit room, sat Jack Thompson, his cleaning cart abandoned by the door, his hands moving over the keys with the practiced grace of a concert pianist. His eyes were closed, his body swaying slightly with the music, lost in the performance. Victoria stood transfixed. This was no amateur playing. This was mastery, the kind that comes from years of dedicated study and natural talent, the kind her father would have respected. The janitor, Jack, played with a depth of emotion that made the inexpensive upright sound like a concert grand, drawing colors and textures from the instrument that shouldn't have been possible. As the piece reached its poignant conclusion, Victoria stepped into the room, unable to remain silent any longer. "You lied to me," Restitute said quietly. Jack's hands froze on the keys, his head snapping up. For a split second, raw pain flashed across his face. Not the embarrassment of being caught, but something deeper, as if she'd interrupted a private communion. "Miss Reynolds," he said, standing quickly, "I apologize. I shouldn't have—" "You said that's not a piece you play because someone dares you," she interrupted. "You didn't say you could play it brilliantly." Jack's expression closed, becoming unreadable again. "I don't play anymore. Not really. Sometimes it helps me think while I work." "That wasn't not really playing," Victoria countered, stepping further into the room. "That was playing at a level most conservatory graduates never achieve." Jack began gathering his cleaning supplies, movements efficient and precise. "It's just muscle memory from another life." "Whose life?" Victoria pressed, suddenly intensely curious about this man. "Who are you, Jack Thompson?" He paused, looking at her directly for the first time. "Just the janitor, Miss Reynolds, nothing more." "We both know that's not true." Jack pushed his cart toward the door. "If you're concerned about me using the piano, it won't happen again. I apologize for the distraction." "That's not—" Victoria began, but he was already moving past her, heading down the hallway with long strides. She watched him go, the echo of Chopin still hanging in the air around her. Something was beginning, a mystery, a connection. She wasn't sure what. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Reynolds was genuinely intrigued by something other than quarterly reports and market share. The next day, Victoria found herself distracted during meetings, her mind returning to the haunting melodies she'd heard the night before. During a budget review, she finally gave in to her curiosity, discreetly messaging her assistant. "Jennifer, I need you to pull whatever HR has on Jack Thompson, the night janitor." The reply came quickly. "Any specific information you're looking for?" "Everything. Employment history, background check, references. I want to know who he is." An hour later, Jennifer placed a thin folder on Victoria's desk during a break between meetings. "There's not much, I'm afraid. Basic application, clean background check, 3 years at a commercial cleaning company before coming here. Before that, it's spotty, mostly odd jobs. Nothing about music in his background." Victoria frowned, opening the folder. Jack Thompson, 48 years old, single father, high school education with some community college, no criminal record. Good references from previous employers who described him as reliable, thorough, and quiet. Nothing remarkable. Nothing to explain the extraordinary talent she'd witnessed. "Is there a problem with him?" Jennifer asked, concern in her voice. "No," Victoria replied distantly, still scanning the sparse documents. "No problem. Thank you, Jennifer." When her assistant had gone, Victoria turned to her computer and typed "J. Thompson pianist" into the search engine. Thousands of results appeared, none seeming relevant. She refined the search, adding classical, then Chopin, narrowing the time frame to 15 to 20 years ago, when he would have been in his late 20s or early 30s, the typical age for an emerging classical musician. And there it was, a grainy image from a 2005 program for the Hammond Classical Showcase Finals. 7 finalists pictured, including a younger Jack Thompson, listed simply as J. Thompson. The caption described him as a rising star studied under William Reynolds. Victoria stared at the screen in shock. William Reynolds, her father. Jack had studied under her father. The connection hit her with unexpected force. Her father had mentored very few pianists, and only those he considered exceptional. If Jack had been among them, he must have been remarkable indeed. But if that were true, why was he cleaning floors at Reynolds Records? What had happened to derail a promising career? And why hadn't her father ever mentioned him? Victoria printed the article, tucking it into her desk drawer. Tonight, she decided, she would find answers. The hospital waiting room was painted in soothing pastels that did nothing to ease Jack's anxiety. Lily sat beside him, thumbing through a dog-eared magazine, seemingly unconcerned about the appointment ahead. Collins had been Lily's cardiologist since she was a toddler, and the quarterly checkups had become routine. But routine didn't mean easy. Each visit carried the weight of possibility that Lily's condition had worsened, that more aggressive treatments would be needed, that the careful balance of medications and limited activity they'd maintained for years might no longer be enough. Thompson? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Lily stood, straightening her school backpack. "That's us, Dad." Jack followed her through the familiar hallway to the examination room, where they went through the well-rehearsed dance of vitals, questions about symptoms, and updates on medications. Janitor Collins arrived 10 minutes later, her kind face showing the first hints of middle age since Jack had met her 13 years earlier. "Lily," she smiled warmly, "how's my favorite musician doing?" "Good," Lily replied. "Miss Garcia says I might be ready for the youth orchestra next year." "Excellent, but let's see what your heart has to say about that, shall we?" Collins began her examination, listening to Lily's heart, reviewing her charts, asking specific questions about symptoms and episodes. Jack watched anxiously, trying to read the doctor's neutral expression for any signs of concern. When the examination was complete and Collins sat back. "Overall, things are stable, which is good news." Jack felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "But," he prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification in her tone. "But," Dr. Collins continued, "I'm seeing some changes in her echocardiogram that concern me. The valve stenosis seems to be progressing, and her last act showed some rhythm abnormalities." "What does that mean?" Lily asked before Jack could. Dr. Collins addressed her directly, which Jack had always appreciated. "It means we need to monitor you more closely, Lily. I'd like to run some additional tests, and we may need to adjust your medications." "But the orchestra," Lily began. "Let's take this one step at a time, Doctor," Collins said gently. "I'm not saying no to the orchestra. I'm saying we need more information." Jack nodded, forcing himself to remain calm for Lily's sake. "What tests do you recommend?" "I'd like to schedule a more comprehensive workup at Westfield Cardiac Center in Boston. They have some specialized equipment and expertise that would be valuable in Lily's case." "Boston?" Jack felt a flicker of panic. That would be difficult logistically and financially." Dr. Collins' expression was sympathetic. "I understand, Jack, but Westfield is the best facility for pediatric cardiac cases in the country. They have specialists who deal specifically with congenital valve defects like Lily's. Let me at least refer you for a consultation. They can work with you on the financial aspects." Jack knew what that meant. More bills, more payments, more shifts, more stress. But looking at Lily's face, hopeful despite the serious conversation happening around her, he knew there was only one answer. "Of course," he said, "whatever Lily needs." Later, as they left the hospital, Lily glanced up at her father. "It's going to be fine, Dad. Stop worrying." Jack managed a smile. "That's my line." "Yeah, well, someone has to say it when your forehead does the map thing." He laughed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "When did you get so wise?" "Must be all those Mozart sonatas," she replied with mock seriousness. "They say classical music makes you smarter." As they walked to the bus stop, Jack felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on him. How would he afford specialists in Boston? How could he take time off work for the consultations? The questions swirled, but he pushed them aside, one step at a time, as he always told Lily. First they would get home, then he would figure out the rest. He always did. Victoria waited until nearly midnight before returning to the office. The security guard, Joe, barely raised an eyebrow when she arrived. Late nights were not unusual for her. But tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't there to work. "Jack's on the executive floor," Joe mentioned casually as she signed in. "Started there about 20 minutes ago." Victoria nodded, grateful for the information she hadn't needed to ask for. "Thanks, Joe." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual. Victoria had spent the afternoon researching Jay Thompson, piecing together fragments of a career that had shown tremendous promise before disappearing completely around 2009. References to exceptional talent, innovative interpretations, a distinctive style that blended classical precision with emotional depth. And then nothing, as if he had simply vanished from the music world. She found him in the conference room, methodically cleaning the large glass table where the board met. He worked with focus and efficiency, seemingly unaware of her presence until she spoke. "You studied with my father." Jack's hand stilled on the glass surface, but he didn't look up. "A long time ago." "You were a finalist in the Hammond Showcase," she continued, stepping into the room. "Critics called you brilliant." Now he did look up, his expression guarded. "You've been researching me." "Yes." "Why?" Victoria considered the question. "Why indeed?" "Because I heard you play Chopin last night, and it made me curious about the janitor who plays like a concert pianist." Jack resumed cleaning, his movements precise and controlled. "I'm not that person anymore." "What happened?" Victoria asked, moving to stand on the opposite side of the table facing him. "According to everything I could find, you were on track for a significant career. Then you disappeared around 2009. No performances, no recordings, nothing." Jack was silent for a long moment, and Victoria thought he might refuse to answer. Then quietly, "My wife Sarah, cancer. She passed in the spring of 2009. Our daughter was 2. The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with all it didn't say. Victoria felt a sudden shame at her probing questions. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. Jack nodded, accepting the condolence without comment. He moved to the next section of the table, spraying glass cleaner in a practiced motion. "You could have continued your career," Victoria said after a moment. "Many musicians have families." "Not when their child has a heart condition that requires constant care and monitoring," Jack replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "Not when there's no one else to watch her while you're on tour. Not when every spare dollar goes to medical bills." Victoria hadn't considered that. "Your daughter is ill?" "Congenital heart defect. She inherited it from her mother." Jack's hands moved rhythmically across the glass. "She's stable mostly, but it requires care, medications, regular doctor visits. A touring schedule wouldn't allow for that." "So you gave up music?" Jack looked up, his eyes meeting hers directly. "I gave up performing. I never gave up music." Something in his tone made Victoria pause. There was a quiet dignity in it, a certainty that demanded respect. She found herself reconsidering this man who cleaned her building by night. "My father never mentioned you," she said. "He mentored very few pianists." "William was selective about his students," Jack agreed. "And I was only with him for about 2 years, from 1998 to 2000. "Why did you stop studying with him?" A flicker of something, pain perhaps, or anger, crossed Jack's face. "Creative differences," he said finally. "Your father had very specific ideas about interpretation. I had others." Victoria almost smiled. That sounded like her father. Brilliant, exacting, and utterly convinced of his own rightness in all matters musical. "Yet you work here," she observed, "at his company." "Life is full of ironies, Miss Reynolds." Jack finished the table and moved to empty the trash cans. "I need the job. Reynolds Records pays better than most cleaning contracts. And the hours allow me to be with my daughter during the day." "Your daughter," Victoria repeated. "What's her name?" "Lily," Jack replied, and for the first time his expression softened. "She's 13 now, plays piano, despite my attempts to interest her in less heartbreaking instruments." "Like the tuba?" Victoria suggested, surprising herself with the attempt at humor. Jack actually smiled. "I was thinking more along the lines of the kazoo. Portable, affordable, and you can play it lying down." The moment of lightness passed quickly, and Jack returned to his work, clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. "I have more rooms to clean, Ms. Reynolds," he said, polite but firm. "Was there something specific you needed?" Victoria hesitated. What did she need? Why was she really here, talking to the night janitor about his past and his daughter? She wasn't entirely sure herself. "No," she said finally. "Nothing specific. I heard you play, and I wanted to understand." Jack nodded, accepting this without comment. He gathered his cleaning supplies and headed for the door, his cart rolling silently on well-maintained wheels. "Mr. Thompson," Victoria called after him. He paused, looking back. "If you ever want to play that Steinway in the lobby, really play it, not just polish it, you have my permission." Jack's expression was unreadable in the dim light. Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. But I don't play anymore. Not like that. As he disappeared down the hallway, Victoria was left with the distinct feeling that she had only begun to scratch the surface of Jack Thompson's story. And despite herself, she wanted to know more. The following Saturday found Victoria doing something she hadn't done in years, driving through an unfamiliar neighborhood without a business purpose. After her conversation with Jack, she had found herself unable to let go of the mystery he presented. A brilliant pianist turned janitor, a single father caring for an ill child, a man who had studied with her father yet now cleaned her building. The contradictions fascinated her, which was why she now found herself parking outside the Highland Community Center, having discovered through discreet inquiries that Jack taught beginner piano lessons there on weekends. She told herself she was merely curious, that this was no different from researching any other puzzle that caught her attention. But the flutter of anticipation in her stomach suggested otherwise. The community center was busy with weekend activities, a basketball game in the main gym, an art class in one room, what looked like a community meeting in another. Victoria felt conspicuous in her casual designer clothes, clearly out of place among the working-class families who frequented the center. She followed the sound of pianos to a hallway lined with small practice rooms. Through windows in the doors, she could see various lessons in progress. In room E, she found Jack, sitting beside a young boy of about 9, patiently demonstrating finger positions on a basic exercise. Victoria stood back, observing unnoticed. Jack was different here, more animated, more present. He smiled encouragingly as the boy attempted the exercise, gently correcting without criticizing. His approach was patient but not condescending, serious about the music but light in delivery. The boy was clearly responding well, his initial frustration giving way to concentration as Jack guided him through the difficult passage. When the lesson ended, the boy's mother collected him, exchanging a few words with Jack before they departed. Victoria stepped back, pretending to study a bulletin board as they passed. Once they had gone, she approached the practice room. Jack was gathering sheet music when he looked up and saw her. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by caution. "Miss Reynolds," he said, straightening, "this is unexpected." "Please, call me Victoria," she replied, feeling strangely nervous. "I hope you don't mind. I was curious about your teaching." "How did you know I teach here?" Victoria hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I asked Jennifer to find out, my assistant," she clarified at his blank look. "You had your assistant investigate me." Jack's tone was flat, not quite accusatory, but definitely not pleased. "I was curious," Victoria repeated, aware of how inadequate the explanation sounded. "After our conversation, I wanted to understand more about your situation." "My situation," Jack echoed. "You mean how a supposedly talented pianist ended up scrubbing toilets in your building?" The bluntness of his statement caught Victoria off guard. "That's not, Dad." A young voice interrupted them as Lily appeared in the doorway, sheet music clutched to her chest. She stopped short when she saw Victoria. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had someone." "It's all right, Lily," Jack said, his expression softening instantly. "This is Ms. Reynolds. She's from work." Victoria noted the careful phrasing, "Not my boss or the CEO, just from work," maintaining dignity in front of his daughter. "Hello, Lily," Victoria said, smiling at the girl. "Your father was just showing me some of his teaching techniques." Lily glanced between them, clearly curious but too well-mannered to pry. "Nice to meet you, Dad. Miss Garcia wants to know if I can try the Beethoven Sonata for the spring recital. She says it's ambitious but thinks I can handle it." Jack's expression grew concerned. "The Pathétique? That's a demanding piece, Lily. Physically taxing." "I know, but we just came from Dr. Collins yesterday," Jack reminded her gently. "She wants you to take it easy until we get the results from the new tests." Lily's face fell, but she nodded, accepting the limitation without argument. Victoria was struck by the maturity in her response, a child who had clearly grown accustomed to hearing no for health reasons. "Maybe the Mozart instead," Lily suggested. "K545 isn't as strenuous." Jack considered this, then nodded. "Let's talk to Miss Garcia about that one. It's still challenging musically without being as physically demanding." Victoria watched the exchange with interest. Jack's concern for his daughter was evident, but so was his respect for her musical aspirations. He wasn't shutting down her dreams, just helping her find a safer path toward them. I should let you get back to your lessons, Victoria said, suddenly feeling like an intruder in this private moment between father and daughter. Actually, we're finished for the day, Jack replied. Lily just had her practice session, and I'm done teaching. Oh. Victoria hadn't planned what to do if she actually encountered Jack. Now that she had, she felt uncharacteristically uncertain. Well, I won't keep you then. Lily was studying Victoria with open curiosity now. Are you a pianist too, Ms. Reynolds? The question caught Victoria by surprise. I used to play, a long time ago. Ms. Reynolds' father was my teacher, briefly, Jack explained to Lily. William Reynolds. He was a very important figure in classical music. Lily's eyes widened. Wait, Reynolds like Reynolds Records? Where you work? The same, Jack confirmed. That's so cool. Lily turned to Victoria with newfound interest. So you own the company where Dad works? I run it, Victoria corrected gently. My father founded it. Do you still have his music stuff? Lily asked eagerly. Dad says Mr. Reynolds had an amazing collection of scores and recordings. Jack shot his daughter a warning look, but Victoria found herself smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. I do, actually, she said. Most of his personal collection is at my house. The company archives are more commercial recordings. Lily, Jack interjected. Ms. Reynolds is probably very busy. We shouldn't keep her. Actually, Victoria heard herself saying, I'd be happy to show you some of my father's collection sometime, if you're interested. The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Jack. What was she doing, inviting the night janitor and his daughter to view her father's private collection? It was unprecedented, potentially inappropriate, and definitely not something the board would approve of. Yet looking at Lily's excited face and Jack's cautious one, Victoria found she didn't care what the board would think. Really? Lily asked, eyes shining. Could we, Dad? Jack hesitated, clearly torn between his daughter's obvious excitement and the complexity of the situation. That's very generous, Ms. Reynolds, but... Please call me Victoria, she insisted again. And it's no trouble. My father's collection should be appreciated by people who understand its value. Jack studied her, as if trying to decipher her motivation. Finally, he gave a small nod. That's very kind. Perhaps sometime when Lily's schedule allows. Tomorrow? Lily suggested immediately. I don't have anything tomorrow afternoon. Jack gave her a look that spoke volumes about her enthusiasm, but his tone remained gentle. Let's not impose on Ms. Reynolds' weekend. Tomorrow would be fine, actually, Victoria said, surprising herself again. Say, 2 o'clock? I could text you my address. She hesitated, realizing she didn't have his personal number. That is, if you're comfortable sharing your contact information. Jack seemed to weigh the request, then pulled out a worn smartphone and recited his number. Victoria entered it into her phone, aware of the strangeness of the moment. The CEO exchanging phone numbers with the night janitor, making social plans for the weekend. Great, she said, feeling oddly like a teenager arranging a study date. Tomorrow at 2, then. Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Victoria, Jack corrected himself. Lily, we should let Ms. Reynolds get on with her day. See you tomorrow, Lily called cheerfully as Jack guided her from the room. Victoria watched them go, father and daughter, the contrast between Jack's cautious reserve and Lily's open enthusiasm striking. She found herself looking forward to tomorrow with an anticipation she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't business, wasn't networking, wasn't part of her carefully constructed professional life. This was something else entirely. As she drove home, Victoria questioned her own actions. What was she doing inviting Jack Thompson and his daughter to her home? What was she hoping to discover? And why did it matter so much? She had no answers, only a sense that the janitor who played Chopin in empty rooms had somehow awakened something long dormant within her. A curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper she wasn't yet ready to name. The lakeside estate stood like a sentinel on the shores of Lake Winchester. Its stone facade and sprawling grounds a testament to old money and timeless taste. Victoria Reynolds had never thought of the house as particularly grand. It was simply home. But watching Jack and Lily Thompson approach up the winding driveway, she suddenly saw it through their eyes. Imposing, elegant, untouchable. Jack's ancient Honda Civic looked almost apologetic as it parked beside Victoria's sleek Mercedes in the circular drive. She watched from the doorway as father and daughter emerged, Lily gazing around with undisguised wonder, while Jack maintained his careful composure, one hand protectively on his daughter's shoulder. "This is where you live?" Lily asked as they approached the entrance. "It's like a castle," Victoria smiled. "It's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it, my father expanded it, and now it's mostly just me rattling around in too many rooms." "Just you?" Lily seemed genuinely perplexed by the notion of one person occupying such a vast space. "Lily," Jack murmured, a gentle reminder about personal questions. "It's all right," Victoria assured him, stepping aside to welcome them in. "Yes, just me. Well, and Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper, but she only comes 3 days a week now." The foyer opened into a grand hall with a sweeping staircase and gleaming hardwood floors. Victoria led them through to a sunlit sitting room that offered panoramic views of the lake. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, while original artwork, mostly abstract pieces in bold colors, adorned the others. "Please make yourselves comfortable," Victoria gestured to the plush seating. "Would you like something to drink? Water, tea, coffee?" "Water would be nice, thank you," Jack replied, still standing, taking in the room with a careful gaze. "Can I have hot chocolate?" Lily asked hopefully. Jack gave her a look, but Victoria smiled. "Absolutely. I'll be right back." In the kitchen, Victoria found herself fussing over the refreshments more than usual. She selected the hand-painted mugs instead of the everyday ones, arranged cookies on her grandmother's silver platter, and took care with the hot chocolate, using real milk and premium cocoa rather than the instant packets she kept for rare visits from colleagues' children. Why was she making such an effort? These weren't business associates to impress, just a night janitor and his daughter, here to see her father's music collection. Yet as she arranged everything on a tray, Victoria realized she wanted to make a good impression. Not as CEO Victoria Reynolds, but simply as Victoria, a woman sharing something she valued. When she returned, she found Lily examining the grand piano that dominated one corner of the room, a magnificent Bosendorfer that had belonged to her father. Jack stood nearby, his hands clasped behind his back as if to physically prevent himself from touching the instrument. "It's beautiful," Lily breathed, not touching the keys but leaning close to examine the intricate inlay work on the music rack. "My father had it specially made," Victoria said, setting down the tray. "The wood is from a single 300-year-old maple. He claimed it gave the tone a particular warmth." Jack nodded. "I remember him saying that. He was very proud of this instrument." A momentary silence fell as they all regarded the piano. Victoria realized it had been years since anyone had played it. After her father's death, she'd kept it meticulously tuned out of respect for his memory, but it remained untouched, a museum piece rather than a living instrument. "Do you play it often?" Lily asked, accepting the mug of hot chocolate Victoria offered. "I don't play at all anymore," Victoria admitted. "Not since I was about your age, actually." "Why not?" The question was direct, innocent in its curiosity. Victoria hesitated, unused to discussing personal matters so openly. "I wasn't very good, at least not as good as my father wanted me to be." Jack's eyes met hers briefly, a flash of understanding passing between them. He, too, had faced William Reynolds' exacting standards. "That seems silly," Lily declared with teenage frankness. "You don't have to be a professional to enjoy playing." Jack cleared his throat. "Lily, remember what we discussed about—" "No, she's right," Victoria interrupted, surprising herself. "It is silly. I loved playing, I just got out of the habit." Lily nodded sagely as if this confirmed a theory. "Dad says that happens sometimes. People forget what they love because life gets complicated." Victoria glanced at Jack, who looked slightly uncomfortable at having his wisdom quoted. "Your dad is very perceptive." "You mentioned your father's collection," Jack said, clearly steering the conversation to safer ground. "Lily's been looking forward to seeing it." "Of course," Victoria replied, grateful for the redirect. "It's in his study. Follow me." She led them down a hallway lined with photographs, mostly of William Reynolds with various music industry luminaries through the decades. Jack paused briefly at one, showing a much younger William with Leonard Bernstein, the two deep in animated conversation. "He talked about Bernstein often," Jack commented, "said he was one of the few who truly understood the responsibility of interpreting another's work." Victoria nodded. "He quoted him constantly. To achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan, and not quite enough time. Jack smiled faintly. That sounds like William. At the end of the hall stood a heavy oak door. Victoria produced a small key from her pocket and unlocked it, swinging the door open to reveal William Reynolds' private sanctuary. The study was exactly as he had left it 5 years earlier. Wood-paneled walls lined with custom shelving, a massive desk positioned to catch the morning light, and in the center of it all, a state-of-the-art sound system surrounded by thousands of vinyl records, CDs, and scores. Unlike the rest of the house, which Victoria had gradually made her own, this room remained untouched, preserved like an exhibit to a life devoted to music. "Oh my God," Lily breathed, eyes wide. "It's like a music library." "In many ways it is," Victoria agreed. "My father collected original scores, rare recordings, even composers' letters and personal effects when he could find them." Jack moved slowly into the room, his eyes taking in the collection with the reverence of someone who understood its true value. "I'd forgotten how extensive it was. He was already building it when I studied with him, but this is overwhelming," Victoria suggested. "Magnificent," Jack corrected. Lily was already exploring, moving carefully among the shelves. "Are these organized somehow?" "Chronologically, then alphabetically by composer," Victoria explained. "The bottom shelves are recordings, the middle are published scores, and the top ones contain original manuscripts and personal papers." "Can I look at some?" Lily asked, excitement barely contained. "Of course, that's why we're here." For the next hour, Victoria watched as Jack and Lily explored the collection. Jack moved with the confidence of someone revisiting familiar territory, occasionally pulling out a score or recording to show Lily, explaining its significance with quiet authority. Lily absorbed it all, asking questions that revealed a deeper understanding of music than Victoria had expected from a 13-year-old. It struck Victoria that Jack had clearly educated his daughter well, despite their limited means. Lily's knowledge of classical music was impressive. She recognized composers, understood basic theory, and spoke about musical periods with casual familiarity. It was the kind of education that came not from formal lessons, but from a lifetime of living with music. "Dad, look!" Lily exclaimed suddenly, carefully pulling a folder from one of the middle shelves. "It's that piece you were telling me about, the one Mr. Reynolds was working on." Jack came to her side, taking the folder with careful hands. His expression changed as he opened it, a mixture of surprise and something deeper, more personal. "What is it?" Victoria asked, moving closer. "Heartstrings," Jack replied quietly. "An unfinished piece your father and I were working on together, just before I left his tutelage." Victoria looked over his shoulder at the handwritten score. Half the pages were in her father's distinctive, precise notation, the other half in a different hand, presumably Jack's, with penciled annotations in both scripts scattered throughout. "You composed together?" she asked, surprised. Her father had rarely collaborated creatively with anyone, preferring to maintain complete control over his work. "Briefly," Jack confirmed. "This was meant to be a piano duet, something new that combined classical structure with more contemporary harmonies. We disagreed on the direction it should take after this section." He pointed to a measure where the music abruptly ended. "That was around the time I left." "Can you play it?" Lily asked eagerly. Jack shook his head. "It's unfinished, Lily. And besides, we're guests here. We shouldn't impose." "I don't mind," Victoria found herself saying. "The piano hasn't been played in years. It would be nice to hear it again." Jack hesitated, clearly torn. "I haven't played seriously in 15 years. I wouldn't do it justice." "Please, Dad," Lily pleaded. "Just the part that's finished. I've never heard you play a real grand piano before." Victoria watched the internal struggle play across Jack's face. She understood his reluctance to play her father's piano in her father's house, a piece they had fought over, but she found herself hoping he would agree. "Just the completed section," Jack finally conceded, "and only because the alternative is listening to Lily beg all the way home." Lily grinned triumphantly. "You know you want to try that Bosendorfer." The three of them returned to the sitting room where the afternoon sun now bathed the grand piano in golden light. Jack approached it almost reverently, running his hand lightly along its polished surface before settling on the bench. He adjusted it slightly, positioned the score, and then paused, his hands hovering above the keys. For a moment, Victoria thought he might change his mind. Then his hands descended, and the room filled with music. The piece began softly, contemplatively, with a melody that seemed to ask a question. The harmony was unusual, not quite classical, not quite modern, but something in between that felt both familiar and fresh. As Jack played, Victoria could hear her father's influence in the structured development, but there was something else too, a warmth, an emotional openness that William Reynolds had often lacked in his own compositions. Jack played with quiet intensity, his body still except for his hands, which moved across the keys with the assurance of someone who knew exactly what each note should say. The music grew, building to what should have been a climax, but then abruptly stopped at the measure where the composition remained unfinished. The final notes hung in the air, unresolved, waiting for a continuation that had never been written. Silence filled the room. Lily stared at her father wide-eyed as if seeing him for the first time. Victoria felt something shift inside her, a recognition perhaps of the artist hidden beneath the janitor's uniform. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Jack closed the piano lid gently. "It could have been if we'd finished it." "Why didn't you?" Lily asked. Jack exchanged a glance with Victoria. "Creative differences," he said, echoing his earlier explanation. "Your grandfather had very specific ideas about where the piece should go next. I had others." "Like what?" Victoria found herself genuinely curious. Jack hesitated, then reopened the piano. William wanted to resolve the tension like this. His hands moved over the keys, playing a series of chords that brought the hanging melody to a neat, conventional resolution. Clean, elegant, safe. "And you wanted?" Victoria prompted. Instead of answering verbally, Jack played again, the same unfinished phrase, but this time continuing with something entirely different. The music took an unexpected turn, venturing into territory that was more emotionally complex, more harmonically adventurous. It wasn't polished, clearly an improvisation rather than a fully formed composition, but it contained a raw honesty that was captivating. When he finished, Jack looked up, a hint of challenge in his eyes. "Something like that." Victoria nodded slowly. "I can see why you disagreed. Your version is riskier." "Dad's always been afraid of taking risks," Lily commented innocently, earning a sharp look from her father. "Not afraid," he corrected gently, "just aware of consequences." An uncomfortable silence threatened to descend, but Victoria moved to break it. "Would anyone like more hot chocolate? Or perhaps a tour of the grounds? The lakeside is particularly beautiful this time of year." "Can we?" Lily asked eagerly. "I've never been to a house with its own lake access before." Jack checked his watch. "We shouldn't overstay our welcome, Lily." "Nonsense," Victoria insisted. "I'm enjoying the company. Unless you have other plans this afternoon?" Jack shook his head. "No other plans. A walk would be nice if you're sure." "Absolutely. Let me grab some jackets. It can be breezy by the water." As they walked along the private shoreline, Victoria observed the easy rapport between Jack and Lily. They moved in the synchronized rhythm of two people who were deeply attuned to each other's needs. Jack instinctively slowing his pace to match Lily's. Lily automatically staying within what Victoria suspected was a medically advisable distance from her father. "This is like paradise," Lily declared, bending to examine a smooth stone at the water's edge. "Do you swim here in the summer?" "Sometimes," Victoria replied, "though less often than I should, given the privilege of having it right there." "We take it for granted, don't we?" Jack mused. "The things that are always available to us." Victoria nodded, understanding he wasn't just talking about the lake. Yes, until suddenly they aren't. They continued walking, the conversation flowing more easily than Victoria had expected. Lily was curious about everything: the history of the estate, Victoria's role at Reynolds Records, what it had been like growing up with William Reynolds as a father. Victoria found herself answering more openly than she normally would, drawn in by the girl's genuine interest and Jack's quiet attentiveness. "So you never wanted to be a musician?" Lily asked as they rounded a bend in the shoreline. "Even though your dad was famous for it?" "Lily," Jack cautioned, "that's personal." "It's all right," Victoria assured him. "I did want to be a pianist, actually. From the time I was very young. I practiced for hours every day, had the best teachers money could buy." "What happened?" Lily pressed. Victoria gazed out over the water. I wasn't good enough, or at least that's what my father told me after a recital when I was 12. He said I had a good business mind and should focus on that instead. She smiled faintly. So I did. That's harsh, Lily said with teenage directness. Lily, Jack warned again, but Victoria waved it off. No, she's right, it was harsh, but that was William Reynolds. Brutally honest even with his own daughter. Especially with his own daughter, Jack murmured, almost to himself. Victoria glanced at him, surprised by the comment and the hint of protectiveness it suggested. Their eyes met briefly before Jack looked away, embarrassed. I'm sorry, he said. That was presumptuous of me. But accurate, Victoria replied. My father held those he cared about to impossible standards. I've often wondered if that was his way of showing love or simply the only way he knew how to relate to people. Jack nodded slowly. I asked myself the same question many times during those 2 years of study. I never found a satisfactory answer. Maybe it was both, Lily suggested. Like, maybe he thought pushing people super hard was how you showed you believed in them. Victoria and Jack both looked at the girl with surprise. That's quite insightful, Lily, Victoria said. Lily shrugged. Miss Garcia says that about our music teacher at school. He's really strict because he thinks we can do better, not because he doesn't like us. Jack smiled proudly at his daughter. When did you get so wise? Definitely from Mom's side, Lily quipped, then immediately glanced at Victoria. My mom died when I was 2. Cancer. Your father mentioned that, Victoria said gently. I'm very sorry. Lily nodded, her expression momentarily solemn before brightening again. Dad says she was an amazing pianist too. That's how they met, at music school. Victoria looked at Jack with new understanding. You met your wife through music. Sarah was studying piano performance at Eastman when I was there, Jack confirmed, his voice softening at the memory. She was brilliant, far more talented than I was, though she'd never admit it. We were married right after graduation. Were you both performing then? Victoria asked. Jack nodded. For a while, Sarah had a promising solo career starting, and I was doing well with chamber music and accompaniment. Then she got pregnant with Lily, and we decided to scale back temporarily. His expression grew distant. We had it all planned out. She'd take a year off, then I'd be the primary caregiver while she resumed performing. We were going to take turns building our careers. But she got sick, Lily said matter-of-factly, having clearly heard this story before. Yes, Jack replied simply. She got sick. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore the only sound. Victoria felt a deep ache for the dreams that had died with Sarah Thompson, not just for Jack, but for the talented woman who never got to realize her potential, for the little girl who would never know her mother. We should head back, Jack said finally. Lily has homework to finish before tomorrow. Of course, Victoria agreed. Thank you both for coming. It's been surprisingly nice to share my father's collection with people who appreciate it. As they walked back toward the house, Lily fell slightly behind, stopping occasionally to collect interesting stones or examine plants along the path. Victoria found herself walking beside Jack, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. She's remarkable, Victoria said quietly, nodding toward Lily. You've done an amazing job with her. She makes it easy, Jack replied. Most of the time, anyway. The teenage years are just beginning, so I'm bracing myself. Victoria smiled. I meant what I said about the music education. She knows more than many adults I've met. Music has always been part of our home, Jack said. Even when I stopped performing, I couldn't stop living with music. I didn't want Lily to grow up without it, especially since... He trailed off. Since it was something she shared with her mother, Victoria finished for him. Jack nodded. Sarah would have wanted her to have that connection. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Victoria spoke again. Would you consider finishing it? Heartstrings, I mean. Jack looked surprised. After 15 years, I don't know if I could, or should. Why not? He hesitated. It feels like disturbing a grave somehow. That piece belongs to another time, another life. Or maybe it's been waiting for the right moment, Victoria suggested, for both of our lives to circle back to it. Jack studied her with those clear gray-green eyes. Why does it matter to you? It was a fair question, one Victoria wasn't entirely sure she could answer. Why did it matter? Why was she standing here beside her knighted janitor, discussing the completion of a long-abandoned composition? Because it deserves an ending, she said finally. Because my father left too many things unfinished. Jack seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. I'll think about it. As they reached the house, Victoria made an impulsive decision. Take the score with you, to consider. Jack looked uncertain. That's your father's original manuscript. It's half yours too, Victoria pointed out, and it's just gathering dust here. Maybe it should be making music instead. After a moment's hesitation, Jack accepted. Thank you, I'll keep it safe. As Victoria watched them drive away, Jack's ancient Honda disappearing down the winding driveway, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. The afternoon had been unlike anything she'd experienced in years. Genuine, unguarded, devoid of the careful calculation that characterized most of her interactions. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Reynolds had simply been herself. Not the CEO, not William Reynolds' daughter, just Victoria. And strangely enough, it had happened in the company of the man who cleaned her building. She returned to the sitting room where the Bosendorfer still sat with his lid open. On impulse, she sat at the bench, placing her fingers lightly on the keys where Jack's had been. She didn't press down, didn't attempt to play, just felt the cool ivory beneath her fingertips and wondered what might have been if she hadn't walked away from music all those years ago. Monday morning found the executive floor of Reynolds Records buzzing with activity. Victoria moved through it with her usual efficiency, dispatching decisions, reviewing reports, and preparing for the afternoon's board meeting. But beneath her professional exterior, her mind kept returning to the strange, intimate afternoons she'd spent with Jack and Lily Thompson. She'd almost convinced herself it had been a momentary aberration, a curious detour that would now fade into memory as she returned to her real life. Then her assistant appeared at her office door. Ms. Reynolds, there's someone here to see you, a Mr. Porter, and I believe it's the head of building maintenance? Victoria looked up with a frown. Frank Porter, she expected. They had the board meeting later. But maintenance? Send them in, Jennifer. Frank entered first, his expensive suit and carefully cultivated silver hair projecting the image of distinguished authority he had crafted over decades in the industry. Behind him came Robert Gaines, the day supervisor for the building's maintenance staff, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Victoria, Frank began without preamble, we have a situation that requires your attention. Victoria maintained her neutral expression. Good morning to you too, Frank. What situation? Frank gestured to Gaines, who cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Reynolds, it's about one of our night staff, Jack Thompson. Victoria felt a cold prickle of apprehension. What about him? Joe Wilkins, our night security guard, reported that Thompson has been using company property without authorization, Gaines explained. Specifically, he's been playing the pianos after hours. I'm aware of that, Victoria replied calmly. In fact, I gave him permission to do so. Both men looked surprised, but Frank recovered quickly. Victoria, that's highly irregular. The instruments are company assets, not toys for the cleaning staff. Victoria fixed him with a cool stare. The Steinway in the lobby was my father's personal property, which he donated to the company. As his heir, I have every right to determine who may or may not play it. That's not the issue, Frank pressed. It's about maintaining appropriate boundaries between management and staff, particularly lower-level staff. The implication was clear, and Victoria felt a surge of anger. I wasn't aware that musical talent was restricted by job title, Frank. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Frank's tone hardened. There's more. Joe shared a video with some colleagues, Thompson playing the piano in the executive lounge. It's been making the rounds internally. Victoria kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. A video? And this is a problem because it's creating a distraction, Frank snapped. People are talking, asking questions about why the night janitor is playing concert-level piano in our building after hours, about why the CEO is taking a special interest in him. I wasn't aware that my interest required board approval, Victoria replied coolly. Frank leaned forward. They do when they affect the company's reputation. Reynolds Records has a certain image to maintain. The board is concerned about appearances. The threat was thinly veiled. Victoria understood perfectly what Frank was implying, that her interaction with Jack could be construed as inappropriate, potentially scandalous. It was ridiculous, of course, but perception often mattered more than reality in corporate politics. Mr. Gaines, she said, turning to the maintenance supervisor, has Jack Thompson performed his duties satisfactorily during his employment here? Gaines shifted uncomfortably. Yes, ma'am, no complaints about his work. He's thorough, reliable, never late. Then I see no issue to address, Victoria concluded. Please inform Thompson that he continues to have my permission to play the pianos, provided it doesn't interfere with his work duties. Gaines nodded, clearly relieved to be dismissed from the tension-filled room. After he left, Victoria turned back to Frank. Is there anything else, Frank? I have a busy morning. Frank didn't move. This isn't like you, Victoria. Getting personally involved with staff, bending rules. It's not the leadership style the board has come to expect. Perhaps the board's expectations need updating, Victoria replied. Now, if there's nothing else. I've seen the video, Frank interrupted. Thompson isn't just some amateur who can plunk out a tune. He's playing at a professional level, which raises the question, who exactly is this man you're defending? Victoria met his gaze steadily. Jack Thompson is an employee of this company who happens to be a talented pianist. That's all the board needs to know. Frank studied her for a long moment. The meeting's at 2. I suggest you prepare yourself for questions. This won't be the end of it. After he left, Victoria sat back in her chair, a sense of foreboding settling over her. Frank was right about one thing. This wouldn't be the end of it. The video's existence complicated matters, creating a tangible link between her and Jack that others could see and judge. The question was, what would she do about it? Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Lily's cardiologist called. Need to take her to Boston for tests sooner than expected. Won't be at work tonight. Sorry for short notice. Jack. Victoria stared at the message, concern immediately overriding her thoughts about Frank and the board. Boston meant the Westfield Cardiac Center, serious specialist for serious conditions. She hesitated only briefly before typing a reply. No apology needed. Lily's health comes first. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. She paused, then added, and Jack, there's a video circulating of you playing piano here, just so you know. His response came a few minutes later. Understood. About both. Thank you. Victoria set her phone down, turning to the window to gather her thoughts. In the span of a weekend, her carefully ordered life had become suddenly, unexpectedly complicated. And strangely enough, she wasn't entirely sorry about it. The board meeting was every bit as contentious as Frank had warned. Victoria sat at the head of the long table, maintaining her composure as the discussion circled around appropriate workplace boundaries and company image concerns, without directly addressing the elephant in the room, the video of Jack that had now been seen by everyone present. The issue isn't about one employee, Frank was saying. It's about consistency in our policies. If we allow some staff special privileges, where do we draw the line? Victoria had had enough. Let's stop pretending this is about policy, Frank. This is about a video of Jack Thompson playing piano, and your implication that there's something inappropriate about my allowing it. A murmur went around the table. Margaret Wilson, the oldest board member at 72 and a lifelong friend of William Reynolds, spoke up for the first time. I've seen the video, she said, her voice still strong despite her age. The man is extraordinarily talented. William would have appreciated that talent being exercised on his piano, regardless of the player's job title. Victoria shot her a grateful look, but Frank was undeterred. With all due respect, Margaret, this isn't about musical appreciation. It's about maintaining professional standards. Victoria has been spending time with this man outside of work hours at her private residence. The revelation sent another ripple through the room. Victoria felt a flash of anger. Someone had been watching her, reporting back to Frank. As CEO of this company, my personal time is my own, she stated firmly. Mr. Thompson's daughter has an interest in classical music. I invited them to view my father's collection. There is nothing inappropriate about that. Your father's collection, Richard Reynolds, Victoria's uncle and chairman of the board, repeated slowly. The collection he kept at Lakeside? Yes, Victoria confirmed. The one no one else in this room has shown any interest in for the past 5 years. Richard exchanged glances with Frank. Victoria, you've never invited anyone to see William's collection. Not industry colleagues, not fellow music lovers. No one. Yet suddenly you're opening your home to a night janitor and his child? Put that way, Victoria had to admit it sounded unusual, even to her own ears. But she wouldn't back down. Jack Thompson isn't just a janitor, she said. He's a former concert pianist who studied with my father. His daughter is a talented young musician with a serious heart condition. I invited them because they would appreciate the collection in a way few others would. This revelation clearly caught many board members by surprise. Margaret Wilson leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. Thompson, not Jay Thompson? The Hammond finalist from 2005? Victoria nodded. The same. Margaret turned to the others. I remember him. Brilliant technique, innovative interpretations. There was talk of him being the next great American pianist before he disappeared from the concert circuit. Which raises another question, Frank interjected. Why is a supposedly brilliant pianist working as a janitor? What happened that made him unemployable in his chosen field? Have we done a thorough background check? His wife died of cancer, Victoria replied, struggling to keep the anger from her voice. He left performing to raise their daughter, who inherited a heart condition from her mother. He works nights so he can be with her during the day. Is that thorough enough for you, Frank? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Richard cleared his throat. While that's unfortunate, it doesn't change the fact that your involvement with this employee is creating talk. The board is concerned about potential complications. What complications? Victoria challenged. Being kind to an employee, recognizing talent, appreciating music? Since when are these actions worthy of board scrutiny? Since they began to affect your judgment, Frank replied smoothly. You've always been rational, focused, business-minded. Suddenly you're defending a night janitor against company policy, inviting him to your home, sending personal text messages. You're monitoring my phone communications? Victoria cut in, genuinely shocked. Frank had the grace to look slightly abashed. Eight flagged an unusual text exchange with an unregistered number that came from your company device. Given the concerns already raised, it was brought to my attention. Victoria stood, placing both hands flat on the table. Let me be absolutely clear. My interactions with Jack Thompson are professional and appropriate. His talent as a musician is extraordinary, and I've given him permission to play the pianos in this building. If anyone has a specific policy violation to cite, I'm happy to address it. Otherwise, this discussion is closed. Richard sighed. Victoria, no one is accusing you of anything improper. We're simply expressing concern about appearances, especially given your position. My position, Victoria repeated, as CEO of a company my father built, which I have run successfully for 5 years, increasing market share despite industry-wide downturns. A position that requires certain standards, Frank insisted. The board would prefer if you limited your interaction with Thompson to normal professional channels going forward. Victoria looked around the table, taking in the mix of uncomfortable and calculating expressions. Only Margaret Wilson met her gaze with something like sympathy. I'll take the board's preference under advisement, Victoria said finally. Now shall we move on to actual business matters? The quarterly projections are in your packets. The meeting continued, but Victoria was only half present. Her mind kept returning to Jack and Lily, wondering how they were faring at Westfield, and to the realization that her interest in them had now become a corporate issue. It was absurd yet entirely predictable in the insular world of executive politics. As the meeting concluded, Margaret Wilson lingered behind, waiting until the others had filed out before approaching Victoria. William would have liked that you're supporting musical talent, regardless of where you found it, the older woman said quietly. He believed true ability was rare and should be nurtured wherever it appeared. Victoria smiled faintly. He had an unusual way of showing it sometimes. He was a complicated man, Margaret agreed. Brilliant but flawed, much like the rest of us. She patted Victoria's hand. Don't let Frank bully you. He's been trying to undermine you since William died. I know, Victoria sighed. He thinks he should be running the company. He thinks he could sell it at a premium and retire comfortably, Margaret corrected. I've heard rumors he's been meeting with Meridian Global executives. Victoria wasn't surprised. Meridian had been circling Reynolds records for years, waiting for an opportunity to absorb one of the few remaining independent labels. Thank you for the warning, she said, and for your support regarding Jack. Margaret nodded. I remember when Jay Thompson disappeared from the concert circuit. There was speculation about burnout, creative differences, personal issues. No one knew he'd left to care for a family. She smiled sadly. It's a familiar story in the arts. Extraordinary talent sacrificed for ordinary love. William never understood that equation. As Margaret left, Victoria remained at the conference table, turning the older woman's words over in her mind. Extraordinary talent sacrificed for ordinary love. Is that how Jack saw it? As a sacrifice? Or as the only choice a father could make? And what about her? Had she sacrificed her love of music for the extraordinary power of running Reynolds records? Or had she simply been following the path of least resistance, accepting her father's judgment of her abilities? These questions still occupied her mind hours later as she worked late into the evening, the office quiet around her. On impulse, she made her way to the executive lounge, where the upright piano sat in shadow. She touched the keys lightly, remembering how Jack's hands had moved across them, how the room had filled with Chopin's Nocturne. Victoria sat on the bench, positioning her hands as she'd been taught so long ago. Slowly, hesitantly, she began to play, a simple Bach prelude she'd mastered as a child. Her fingers were stiff, unpracticed, but the muscle memory remained, guiding her through the familiar patterns. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't even particularly good. But as Victoria played in the empty room, something long dormant stirred within her. A connection to the girl she'd been before her father's criticism had silenced her music. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway until he spoke. You play better than you think you do. Victoria's hands froze on the keys as she looked up to find Joe, the night security guard, watching her with a gentle smile. I'm sorry, Miss Reynolds, he said quickly. I didn't mean to startle you. I was making my rounds and heard the music. It's all right, Joe, Victoria assured him, embarrassed at being caught. I was just remembering. Joe nodded. Music has a way of bringing back memories. My late wife used to say it was because notes could reach places words couldn't go. Your wife sounds wise, Victoria said, closing the piano lid. She was. Joe hesitated. Ms. Reynolds, about that video of Jack playing. I'm afraid that was my doing. I recorded it on my phone, just a short clip. I only meant to show it to my grandson. He's learning piano, and I thought it might inspire him. I never expected it to spread. Victoria studied the older man, seeing the genuine remorse in his expression. It's all right, Joe, no real harm done, though I think Jack might be embarrassed by the attention. He's a private man, Joe agreed. Keeps to himself mostly, but sometimes late at night he plays, and it's like the whole building comes alive. He smiled. Reminds me why I don't mind the night shift so much. After Joe continued on his rounds, Victoria remained at the piano, thinking about his words. The whole building comes alive. She'd felt it too. The way Jack's playing had transformed the sterile executive lounge into something vibrant and real. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Jack. Back from Boston. Lily needs comprehensive workup and likely surgery at Westfield. Scheduling for 3 weeks from now. We'll be at work tonight. Victoria replied immediately. How is she taking the news? A pause, then, better than I am, says she's excited to stay in a fancy Boston hotel. Victoria smiled at that. Lily's resilience was remarkable. Is there anything I can do to help? Another pause, longer this time. Not unless you know how to come up with $350,000 for medical expenses. Insurance covers some, but, sorry, inappropriate joke. We'll manage somehow. Victoria stared at the message, the figure sending a chill through her. $350,000 was a fortune for someone on a janitor's salary, an impossible sum. Yet for her, it was less than she spent annually on maintaining Lakeside Estate. She began typing a reply offering financial help, then stopped. Jack's pride was evident in everything he did, from the dignified way he performed his janitorial duties to his careful parenting of Lily. Offering money, however well-intentioned, would likely be seen as charity rather than help. Instead, she wrote, Lily is lucky to have you fighting for her. See you later tonight. His reply was simple. Midnight, basement level first. Victoria put her phone away, a plan already forming in her mind. If she couldn't help Jack directly, perhaps there were other ways to ensure Lily got the care she needed. William Reynolds had established a medical foundation years ago, focused on supporting artists with health crises. It had been largely inactive since his death, but the funds were still there, waiting to be directed toward worthy causes. A 13-year-old pianist with a heart condition seemed exactly the sort of case William would have supported, especially if he'd known she was the daughter of Jay Thompson, the brilliant student he'd once mentored. Victoria would need to be careful to ensure Jack never knew the foundation's support was her doing. But it was a start, a way to help without wounding his pride. And somehow, making this happen felt more important than anything else on her CEO agenda. As midnight approached, Victoria found herself still in her office, ostensibly reviewing contracts, but actually waiting for Jack's shift to begin. It was ridiculous, she knew, the CEO lingering after hours to see the night janitor. Yet here she was, like a teenager with a crush, watching the clock and making excuses to stay late. At 12:15, she gathered her courage and made her way to the basement level, where the cleaning staff had their break room and supply storage. The utilitarian hallway was a stark contrast to the sleek design spaces above. Concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, industrial doors marked with functional labels. She found Jack in the supply room, loading his cart with cleaning products and fresh towels. He looked up in surprise when she appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, straightening. "I didn't expect to see you down here." "Victoria," she corrected, "and I wanted to check on you. How was Boston?" Jack's expression softened slightly. "Clinical, efficient, expensive." He returned to loading his cart. Lily liked the specialist, Dr. Matthews, said he explained things without talking down to her. "That's important," Victoria agreed. "And the prognosis?" Jack's hand stilled on a bottle of glass cleaner. "She needs a valve replacement. It's a major surgery, but Dr. Matthews is confident about the outcome. The recovery will be the hardest part, 6 to 12 months of limited activity while the heart adapts." "I'm sorry," Victoria said, meaning it. "That's a lot for both of you to face." Jack nodded, resuming his preparations. "We'll get through it. We always do." Victoria hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Jack, about the financial aspect." "Don't," he interrupted, his tone firmer than she'd ever heard it. "Please, I appreciate your concern, but that's not why I mentioned it in my text. It was a moment of weakness. I'll figure it out." "There are resources." "I know about resources," Jack said, cutting her off again. "Charity funds, payment plans, crowdfunding. I've been navigating medical expenses for 13 years, Victoria. I'll handle it." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, as was the fear beneath it. Victoria recognized both, the determination to stand on one's own, coupled with the terror of failing those who depended on you. "All right," she conceded, "but if you change your mind." "I won't." Jack pushed his cart toward the door. "I should get started. The executive floor takes the longest." Victoria stepped aside to let him pass, feeling rebuffed but understanding his reaction. "I'll walk with you, if that's all right. I need to get my briefcase from my office anyway." Jack nodded his assent, and they made their way to the elevator in silence. As they rode up together, CEO and janitor, both acutely aware of the strangeness of their situation, Victoria searched for a way to bridge the distance Jack had just created. "The board is concerned about the video of you playing," she said finally. Jack glanced at her. "Joe mentioned it when I arrived. I'm sorry if it's caused problems for you." "It hasn't," Victoria assured him. "Not really. Just some old men being uncomfortable with things that don't fit their worldview." "Like janitors who play Chopin?" There was a hint of wry humor in his voice. "Like CEOs who befriend janitors," Victoria corrected. "They're more concerned about my behavior than yours." The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, dark except for security lighting. Jack pushed his cart out, Victoria following. "And what did you tell them?" he asked, heading toward the first office on his cleaning route. "That my personal time is my own," Victoria replied. "And that talent deserves recognition regardless of job title." Jack paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you, but perhaps they're right to be concerned." "What do you mean?" He gestured between them. "This, whatever it is, It doesn't make sense, Victoria. You're the CEO of a major corporation. I clean toilets and mop floors. In what world do those two people become friends? In a world where both of those people care about music, Victoria answered without hesitation. In a world where a 13-year-old girl reminds them why it matters. Jack's expression softened. Lily hasn't stopped talking about your father's collection. She made me promise we'd accept if you ever invited us back. Consider this an open invitation, Victoria said. For both of you. Anytime. They had reached her office. Jack held the door for her as she entered to retrieve her briefcase. The board won't like it, he warned. The board doesn't have to like everything I do, Victoria replied, gathering her things. That's one of the few perks of being William Reynolds' daughter, a certain latitude for eccentricity. Jack almost smiled at that. Is that what this is? Eccentricity? I prefer to think of it as recognizing kindred spirits, Victoria said. My father always said they were rare enough that you shouldn't ignore them when you find them. Kindred spirits, Jack repeated thoughtfully. I suppose there are worse things to be. As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused in the doorway. Jack, about heartstrings. Have you thought any more about finishing it? He looked surprised by the question. I've been a bit preoccupied with Boston and Lily's diagnosis. Of course, Victoria said quickly. I wasn't suggesting... But yes, Jack interrupted. I have thought about it. I'm not sure I can do it justice after all this time, but... He hesitated. It might be worth trying. For Lily, she'd like to hear it completed. For Lily, then, Victoria agreed, though she suspected they both knew it was about more than that, about unfinished business, abandoned dreams, and the possibility of second chances. As she left the building and drove home through the quiet streets, Victoria reflected on Jack's words. In what world do those two people become friends? It was a fair question. Their lives, their circumstances, their daily realities were worlds apart. Yet something was drawing them together. Music, certainly, but perhaps also a shared understanding of loss and resilience, of paths not taken and choices that define them. The board's concerns suddenly seemed trivial compared to the very real challenges Jack and Lily were facing. A heart surgery, a massive medical bill, an uncertain recovery. These were the things that mattered, not corporate politics or appearances. By the time Victoria reached Lakeside, she had made a decision. The William Reynolds Foundation for Artists in Crisis would be making its first grant in years. To a promising young pianist named Lily Thompson, all she needed to do was ensure Jack never discovered her involvement. It wouldn't be easy, but then nothing that mattered ever was. The following Saturday, Victoria found herself seated in the back row of the Highland Community Center's small recital hall. She had dressed down for the occasion, simple slacks and a sweater, hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup. Still, she felt conspicuously out of place among the working-class families filling the other seats. Their weekend attire decidedly more casual than her idea of casual. The program in her hand announced a student recital, with Lily Thompson listed for a Mozart sonata in the second half. Victoria had learned about it through a carefully casual inquiry to Jack during one of his shifts. She hadn't told him she was coming, wasn't entirely sure herself why she'd decided to attend. Professional interest in a promising young musician, perhaps? Or simple curiosity about this aspect of Jack and Lily's life? The recital began with the youngest students, small children playing simple pieces with varying degrees of success. The audience applauded encouragingly for each one, parents beaming proudly regardless of wrong notes or forgotten passages. Victoria found herself smiling at their earnestness, their unfiltered joy in making music, however imperfectly. When Lily took the stage, Victoria sat up straighter. The girl wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back with a ribbon. She approached the piano with confidence, adjusting the bench before sitting down. Victoria could see Jack in the front row, watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Lily began to play Mozart's sonata in C major, K545, a piece Victoria knew well, having performed it herself as a young student. The girl's technique was solid, her phrasing musical, though Victoria could see she was being careful, deliberately pacing herself. There was a maturity to her interpretation that seemed beyond her 13 years, a thoughtfulness that spoke of real understanding rather than mere imitation. Halfway through the first movement, Lily faltered slightly, her left hand missing a chord. Victoria saw Jack tense, ready to move if needed. But Lily took a deep breath, found her place, and continued, finishing the movement with grace. The audience applauded warmly, and Victoria found herself clapping with genuine appreciation. After the recital, Victoria lingered near the refreshment table, nursing a cup of punch while watching the proud families congratulate their young musicians. Jack stood across the room with Lily, speaking with a middle-aged woman Victoria assumed was the music teacher. She debated whether to approach them or slip away unnoticed when Lily looked up and spotted her. The girl's face lit up, and she tugged on her father's sleeve, pointing in Victoria's direction. Jack turned, surprise clear on his face. After a brief exchange with the teacher, he and Lily made their way across the room. "Ms. Reynolds," Lily greeted her enthusiastically, "you came to hear me play." "I did," Victoria confirmed with a smile. "You were wonderful, Lily. That Mozart is not easy, and you played it beautifully." "I messed up in the middle," Lily admitted, making a face. "And you recovered gracefully," Victoria pointed out. "That's what real musicians do." Jack was still looking at her with a mixture of surprise and something she couldn't quite identify. "I didn't know you were coming," he said. "I hope it's all right," Victoria replied, suddenly uncertain. "I saw the notice at the community center when I was dropping off some old scores for their music library." It was a small lie, but she didn't want to admit she'd come specifically to hear Lily play. "Of course it's all right," Lily answered before Jack could respond. "Right, Dad?" Jack nodded, his expression softening. "Of course, it's very kind of you to come." "I enjoyed it," Victoria said truthfully. "All of it. There's something special about student recitals. So much genuine enthusiasm and love for the music." "Even when we mess up?" Lily asked with a grin. "Especially then," Victoria assured her. "Perfect performances can be impressive, but they're rarely as interesting as the ones where the musician has to overcome something unexpected." "That's what Dad always says," Lily nodded vigorously. "He says mistakes show you're human, and humans are more interesting than robots." Jack looked slightly embarrassed. "I might have phrased it more elegantly." "No, I think that captures it perfectly," Victoria laughed. "Your father is a wise man, Lily." "We usually get ice cream after recitals," Lily said, a hint of suggestion in her tone. "There's a really good place down the street." Jack gave his daughter a look that clearly said, "Subtle, you're not." "Lily, that sounds lovely," Victoria found herself saying. "I can't remember the last time I had ice cream. If you wouldn't mind the company, that is." Jack hesitated only briefly. "We'd be happy to have you join us. Wouldn't we, Lily?" "Definitely," Lily beamed. "They have 27 flavors, and you can get as many toppings as you want." As they walked the 3 blocks to the ice cream parlor, Victoria was struck by how comfortable she felt in their company. Lily chattered excitedly about the recital, analyzing her performance and the performances of her peers with the critical ear of someone who took music seriously. Jack added occasional comments, gently correcting when Lily's critiques became too harsh, praising when she noted something genuinely insightful. The ice cream parlor was a small, family-owned establishment with a 1950s aesthetic: red vinyl booths, black and white checkerboard floor, vintage soda fountain. It was crowded with other families from the recital, children's voices filling the space with a cheerful cacophony. "Best ice cream in town," Lily declared as they joined the line. "What's your favorite flavor, Ms. Reynolds?" "Victoria, please," she reminded the girl. "And I haven't had ice cream in so long, I'm not sure I remember. What do you recommend?" "The butter pecan is excellent," Jack offered. "Or the dark chocolate if you prefer something less sweet." "Dad always gets butter pecan," Lily rolled her eyes. "So boring. I try something different every time. Today I'm thinking cotton candy with rainbow sprinkles and hot fudge." Victoria laughed at Jack's pained expression. "Perhaps I'll split the difference and try the dark chocolate with caramel sauce." When they reached the counter, Jack insisted on paying despite Victoria's protest. "You're our guest," he said firmly. "Besides, ice cream after recitals is our tradition." They found a booth in the corner, somewhat removed from the noisiest families. Victoria watched as Lily attacked her garishly blue ice cream with enthusiasm, while Jack ate his butter pecan with more restraint. "So what did you really think?" Jack asked quietly while Lily was momentarily distracted by waving to a friend across the room. "About Lily's playing?" Victoria took a small bite of her ice cream. I was impressed. She has real musicality, not just technique. She understands the architecture of the piece, which is rare at her age. But, Jack prompted, sensing her hesitation. Victoria chose her words carefully. She's holding back, physically, I mean. I can see her being cautious with her energy. Jack nodded, his expression somber. Her condition limits her. The doctors say she can play, but she has to be careful not to overexert herself. It's a constant balancing act. It must be difficult, Victoria said. For both of you. It is what it is, Jack replied, with the resignation of someone who had long ago accepted difficult circumstances. We adapt. Lily returned her attention to them. What are you guys talking about? You look so serious. Just telling Victoria how proud I am of you, Jack said, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind his daughter's ear. And that I think you're ready to start on that Beethoven sonata you've been wanting to try. Lily's eyes widened. Really? You said it was too demanding. It is demanding, Jack agreed. But after seeing how you handled the Mozart today, I think you're ready, as long as we work on it slowly and take breaks when you need them. The joy on Lily's face was radiant. She turned to Victoria. Did you hear that? I get to play Beethoven. That's wonderful, Victoria smiled. The Pathétique? Lily nodded enthusiastically. I've been asking for months, but Dad said it was too strenuous. It is strenuous, Jack reminded her. We'll have to be careful. Always with the careful, Lily sighed, but without real frustration. She turned to Victoria. Do you know the Pathétique? I used to, Victoria admitted. It was one of my favorites when I was a bit older than you. Maybe you could play it for me sometime, Lily suggested, so I can hear how it's supposed to sound? Victoria hesitated. It's been a very long time since I played it. I'm not sure I do it justice. You don't have to be perfect, Lily said with the same directness she'd shown at Lakeside. Dad says music isn't about perfection. It's about connection. Victoria glanced at Jack, who looked both proud of and slightly embarrassed by his daughter's philosophizing. Your dad seems to have a lot of wisdom about music. He does, Lily agreed seriously. He just doesn't play enough anymore. She turned to her father. You should practice what you preach, Dad. Jack gave a small, rueful smile. I suppose I walked into that one. As they finished their ice cream, Victoria found herself more relaxed than she'd been in years. There was something refreshingly honest about the Thompsons. No posturing, no hidden agendas, just genuine interaction. It was the opposite of the carefully calculated relationships that dominated her professional life, where every word and gesture was weighed for its strategic value. When they parted outside the ice cream parlor, Lily surprised Victoria with a quick hug. Thanks for coming to my recital, she said, and for the ice cream conversation. It was my pleasure, Victoria replied, genuinely touched. Thank you for inviting me into your tradition. Will you come to my next one too? Lily asked hopefully. It's in 6 weeks, and I'm playing Beethoven, Jack intervened. Lily, Ms. Reynolds is very busy. We can't expect... I'd love to, Victoria interrupted, if I can make it work with my schedule. Jack gave her a long look, as if trying to understand her motives. Then he nodded. You're always welcome. As Victoria walked back to her car, she found herself smiling. There was something undeniably appealing about being treated as just a person, not a CEO or William Reynolds' daughter. With Jack and Lily, she could simply be Victoria, a woman who loved music and ice cream and Saturday afternoons without agendas. The problem was she wasn't sure how much longer this unusual friendship could continue before the board's concerns escalated into something more restrictive. Frank Porter was not a man who gave up easily, and he clearly saw her interest in Jack as leverage he could use against her. Victoria's smile faded as she reached her car. The real world was waiting, with all its complications and politics. But for a few hours, she had glimpsed something different, something simpler and more genuine. And she wasn't ready to let it go. The William Reynolds Foundation for Artists in Crisis had been dormant for nearly 5 years, its substantial endowment sitting untouched in investment accounts, while the foundation existed only as a legal entity with minimal activity. Victoria had served as nominal chairperson since her father's death, but had never actively directed its operations, allowing the foundation's small board to maintain the status quo. Now, seated in the conference room of the Reynolds Foundation's modest offices, Victoria faced the surprised expressions of that board. Three elderly colleagues of her father, who met quarterly to review the foundation's investments and approve the occasional small grant to established artists facing medical crises. A complete restructuring? Harold Winters, the foundation's longtime treasurer, repeated incredulously. After all these years of minimal activity? Not a restructuring, Victoria clarified, a revitalization. My father established this foundation to help artists in crisis. In recent years, we've narrowed that mission to supporting only established artists with significant careers. I'm proposing we expand our scope to include emerging artists and talented students who demonstrate exceptional promise. But that was never William's intent, protested Edgar Phillips, who had played cello alongside William Reynolds in his younger days. He wanted to help artists who had already proven their worth, who had contributed to the field. With respect, Edgar, Victoria replied, my father's views evolved over time. In his final years, he spoke often about the need to nurture new talent, not just support established names. This was not entirely true. William Reynolds had remained an elitist to the end, but Victoria knew her father well enough to craft a plausible narrative. And as his heir and the foundation's chairperson, her interpretation of his wishes carried significant weight. Even if we accept this expansion of mission, Harold said, the specific case you're proposing seems unusual. A 13-year-old pianist with a heart condition? What evidence do we have of exceptional talent? Victoria had anticipated this question and came prepared. She pulled out a tablet and played a recording she'd made surreptitiously during Lily's recital. The quality wasn't professional, but it clearly demonstrated the girl's musicality and technical facility. This is Lily Thompson performing Mozart's Sonata in C major, Victoria explained. As you can hear, her playing shows remarkable maturity and understanding for her age. Her teacher at the Highland Community Center believes she has exceptional potential. The board members listened attentively, their expressions softening as the music played. She is talented, Edgar acknowledged, but there are many talented young pianists. What makes this case special? Victoria took a deep breath. Lily Thompson is the daughter of Jay Thompson. A murmur of recognition went around the table. Jay Thompson's brief but brilliant career had made an impact in classical music circles, particularly among those of her father's generation. The Hammond finalist? Edgar asked, eyebrows raised. I thought he disappeared from the music world entirely. He did, Victoria confirmed. After his wife died of cancer, he left performing to raise their daughter, Lily. She inherited her mother's heart condition, which is now requiring major surgery at Westfield Cardiac Center. The medical expenses are beyond what a single father working as a janitor can afford, even with insurance. Jay Thompson is working as a janitor? Harold looked genuinely pained by this information. What a waste of talent. He made a choice, Victoria said quietly, to be there for his daughter. I don't think he considers it a waste. The room fell silent as the board members absorbed this information. Victoria could see them weighing the situation, reconsidering their initial resistance. If we do this, Edgar said finally, it creates a precedent. We'll have applications from every parent who thinks their child is the next Mozart. We can establish clear criteria, Victoria countered, require teacher recommendations, performance videos, academic standing. Make it selective but accessible. And the budget? Harold asked. Medical treatments are expensive, especially at Westfield. I'm proposing we allocate $400,000 for this case, Victoria stated, which would cover the surgery and recovery period. $400,000 for one case? Harold looked shocked. That's more than our entire grant budget for the past 2 years combined. The foundation has an endowment of over $30 million, Victoria reminded him, which has grown by nearly $7 million in the 5 years since my father's death, during which time we've distributed less than $1 million in grants. I think we can afford to be generous in this case. Edgar and Harold exchanged glances, clearly torn between their conservative instincts and the compelling case Victoria had made. There's one more thing, Victoria added. I want this grant to be anonymous. The family should not know it came from the Reynolds Foundation or that I had any involvement in it. Why? Edgar asked, genuinely puzzled. Victoria chose her words carefully. Jay Thompson, Jack Thompson now, works as a janitor at Reynolds Records. I don't want him to feel this is charity from his employer. The grant should come through normal foundation channels, with no connection to me personally. Understanding dawned on the board members' faces, accompanied by a hint of suspicion that Victoria chose to ignore. Very well, Edgar said after a moment. I move that we approve the grant as proposed, with the anonymity stipulation. Seconded, Harold agreed, though with less enthusiasm. Thank you, Victoria said, genuine gratitude in her voice. This is exactly the kind of impact my father wanted the foundation to have. As she left the foundation offices, Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Lily would get her surgery, Jack wouldn't have to bankrupt himself to pay for it, and neither would ever know of her involvement. It was the perfect solution. Yet as she drove back to Reynolds Records for an afternoon of meetings, Victoria couldn't shake a nagging sense of discomfort. She was lying to Jack, not directly, but by omission. She was making decisions that affected his life without his knowledge or consent. Her intentions were good, but did that justify the deception? By the time she reached her office, Victoria had resolved to push these doubts aside. What mattered was that Lily would get the care she needed. Jack's pride was important, but his daughter's health was more important. If that meant bending the truth a little, so be it. She settled at her desk, forcing her attention back to corporate matters, but found her thoughts continually drifting to the Thompsons and the unusual connection that had developed between them. It was a connection that defied the carefully ordered boundaries of her life. CEO and janitor, wealthy and working class, privileged and struggling. Yet somehow, when they were together, those distinctions seemed to fade into irrelevance, leaving only the common ground of music, of parenthood, of human experience. Victoria knew it couldn't last. The board's concerns would escalate, Frank's machinations would continue, and the realities of their different worlds would inevitably reassert themselves. But for now, for this moment, she would hold on to this unexpected friendship in the sense of authenticity it brought to her carefully controlled life. After all, as Jack had said of the unfinished heartstrings, some compositions deserved an ending, even after years of silence. 3 weeks passed with the strange, disconnected rhythm of time when one is both dreading and anticipating something. For Victoria, they were filled with the usual executive duties at Reynolds Records, board meetings that grew increasingly tense as Frank Porter continued his campaign against her leadership, and fleeting late-night conversations with Jack during his shifts. For Jack and Lily, they were consumed with doctor's appointments, pre-surgical preparations, and the mounting anxiety of the approaching operation. The day before Lily was scheduled to leave for Boston, Victoria received a text from Jack. Taking Lily to Westfield tomorrow, she asked if you might want to visit us at the hospital this weekend. Entirely understand if you are too busy. Victoria read the message several times, touched that Lily had asked for her and that Jack had overcome his pride enough to extend the invitation. She replied immediately, I would be honored. Please let me know when would be best for visitors, sending all my thoughts for a successful surgery. Later that evening, a large envelope arrived at her office via internal mail. Inside was a single sheet of staff notepaper with Jack's neat handwriting. Victoria, Lily insists you should have this while we're away. She says it will make more sense when we return. Jack. Beneath it lay a folder Victoria recognized instantly. The original manuscript of Heartstrings, the unfinished composition Jack and her father had begun together 15 years earlier. The last time she'd seen it, she had pressed it into Jack's hands at Lakeside, telling him to consider finishing it. Victoria opened the folder with careful fingers. The original pages were there, showing her father's precise notation intermingled with Jack's more fluid style. But there were new pages too, freshly written sheets continuing the composition beyond where it had originally ended. Jack had begun to finish it. Victoria sat at her desk, studying the new material. Even with her rusty musical knowledge, she could see that Jack had taken the piece in the direction he'd improvised that day at her house. The more emotionally complex, harmonically adventurous approach that her father had rejected. But he'd done it with sensitivity and craftsmanship, honoring the existing themes while developing them in unexpected ways. The last page ended mid-phrase with a penciled note in the margin. To be continued after Boston. Victoria felt a tightness in her throat. This wasn't just a musical composition. It was a promise to Lily, to himself, perhaps even to Victoria. A promise that there would be an after Boston, that this story wasn't ending but continuing. She carefully returned the manuscript to its folder, then did something she hadn't done in years. She picked up her phone and called her personal assistant. Jennifer, please clear my schedule for this weekend. I need to go to Boston. The drive to Boston the following Saturday morning gave Victoria time to think. She told herself, and Jennifer, that this trip was simply to support an employee during a family crisis, a gesture of goodwill from a compassionate CEO. But as the miles passed, Victoria admitted the truth, at least to herself. Jack and Lily had become important to her in ways that defied professional categorization. She found herself wondering when exactly that had happened. Was it the moment she heard Jack playing Chopin in the empty building? Or when Lily had declared with such conviction that one didn't need to be a professional to enjoy playing piano? Perhaps it was during their walk along the lake shore, or the simple pleasure of sharing ice cream after the recital. Whenever it had begun, Victoria knew she had crossed a line, one that the board, Frank Porter in particular, would use against her if they knew she was driving to Boston to visit the night janitor's daughter in the hospital. But for once in her carefully managed life, Victoria Reynolds didn't care about corporate politics or appearances. Some things mattered more. Westfield Cardiac Center occupied an imposing glass and steel building near the medical district. Victoria parked in the visitor's garage and made her way to the pediatric cardiac unit on the 5th floor, carrying a small gift bag. She'd agonized over what to bring, wanting something meaningful but not ostentatious, personal but not presumptuous. She found Jack in the waiting area, his tall frame folded uncomfortably into a molded plastic chair, staring blankly at a muted television mounted on the wall. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered, his shoulders carrying a visible weight. Jack? He looked up, surprise momentarily replacing the fatigue on his face. Victoria, you came. He stood running a hand through his disheveled hair. I wasn't sure you would. I said I would, she replied simply. How is Lily? Jack gestured for her to sit beside him. She's in pre-op preparation. The surgery is scheduled for early tomorrow morning. Dr. Matthews says it will take 8 to 14 hours, depending on what they find once they begin. Victoria heard the strain beneath his matter-of-fact tone. And how are you? He gave a small, humorless laugh. Terrified, trying not to show it, failing miserably. I think you're entitled, Victoria said gently. It's a lot to face alone. Jack looked down at his hands. I keep thinking about Sarah, Lily's mother. She went through so many surgeries, always putting on a brave face. I never knew how she did it. Now I'm trying to do the same for Lily, and I feel like I'm falling apart inside. Victoria hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on his arm. You don't have to be strong every moment, Jack. Not with me. He met her eyes, and for a second she glimpsed the full depth of his fear, raw, unguarded. Then he seemed to collect himself. Thank you for coming, it means a lot to Lily, to both of us. I brought something, Victoria said, offering the gift bag. For Lily, is it all right if I see her? Of course, she's been asking when you'd arrive, Jack stood. They're only allowing immediate family during prep, but I cleared it with the nurses. You can come as my guest. He led her through double doors into the pediatric unit, where cheerful murals and bright colors attempted to soften the clinical reality of the space. They passed rooms where other children lay in beds, surrounded by monitors and equipment, some with parents keeping vigil beside them. Lily's room was at the end of the hall, a private suite with large windows overlooking the city. Victoria was momentarily taken aback by the luxury of the accommodation. The foundation arranged for a private room, Jack explained, misinterpreting her surprise. Some medical charity that supports young musicians. It's been... He seemed to search for words, unexpectedly generous. Victoria kept her expression neutral, careful not to reveal anything. That's wonderful. Lily deserves the best care. Lily was sitting up in bed, a tablet on her lap, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Despite the hospital gown and the monitoring leads attached to her chest, she looked remarkably composed for a 13-year-old facing major surgery. She looked up as they entered, her face brightening. Ms. Reynolds, you really came. I promised I would, Victoria smiled, approaching the bed. And please, remember, it's Victoria. Victoria, Lily corrected herself. Dad said you might be too busy with CEO stuff. Victoria glanced at Jack, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. I'm never too busy for friends, she said, setting the gift bag on the edge of the bed. I brought you something. Lily eagerly reached for the bag. Can I open it now? That's generally how gifts work, Victoria replied with a smile. Lily pulled out a small, vintage music box, carved from rich walnut with an inlaid design of musical notes on the lid. It's beautiful, she breathed, running her fingers over the polished wood. Open it, Victoria encouraged. Lily lifted the lid, and the delicate notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room. Inside, a miniature piano keyboard rotated slowly. It was mine when I was about your age, Victoria explained. My grandmother gave it to me when I started piano lessons. I thought, I thought you might like some music during your recovery, even when you can't play yourself. Lily looked up, her eyes wide. This was yours, but it's so special. Are you sure you want me to have it? Very sure, Victoria assured her. It's been sitting on a shelf for years. It deserves to be with someone who appreciates it. Lily held the music box carefully as if it were made of glass. Thank you, I'll take really good care of it. I know you will. Victoria sat in the chair beside the bed. So tell me how you're feeling about tomorrow. Scared, Lily admitted, her composure slipping slightly. But Dr. Matthews says I have a strong heart, just with some plumbing issues they need to fix. Plumbing issues? Victoria raised an eyebrow. That's how he explained it, Lily nodded. He said the valves in my heart are like pipes with faulty connections. They're going to replace the leaky one with a new one that works better. That's a good way to think about it, Victoria agreed. Sometimes complex things are easier to understand when we compare them to everyday objects. That's what Dad always says about music, Lily replied. He says a sonata is like a story, with characters and conflicts and a resolution. Jack, who had been standing quietly by the door, moved to sit on the edge of Lily's bed. Speaking of music, did you show Victoria what you've been working on? Lily brightened. Oh, I almost forgot. She reached for a notebook on the bedside table. I've been helping Dad with heartstrings. He's been writing the new parts, but I've been giving opinions. Very strong opinions, Jack added dryly. That's wonderful, Victoria said. Jack sent me the pages you've completed so far. It's coming along beautifully. He's going to finish it while I'm recovering, Lily announced, so I can hear the whole thing when I'm better. We're going to play it together, Dad on piano, me on violin once I'm allowed to play again. Victoria glanced at Jack, who nodded. That's the plan, a goal to work toward during recovery. I look forward to hearing it, Victoria said, touched by their shared project. They spent the next hour in easy conversation, Lily showing Victoria her favorite games on the tablet, Jack occasionally adding comments or gentle corrections when Lily's enthusiasm led to exaggeration. Victoria was struck by how comfortable it felt, this simple interaction with no agenda beyond human connection. A nurse appeared at the door. Time for the next round of pre-op meds, Lily, and then you should try to rest. Lily made a face but didn't argue. Will you come back tomorrow, Victoria, after the surgery? Victoria hesitated, looking to Jack for guidance. It's likely to be a very long day, he said carefully. Victoria might not be able to wait that long. I'll come, Victoria assured Lily. I might not be able to stay the entire time, but I'll be here. Lily nodded, satisfied. Good. Dad needs someone to keep him company so he doesn't worry too much. Jack rolled his eyes affectionately. Thanks for the vote of confidence, kiddo. After saying goodbye to Lily, Jack walked Victoria back to the visitors area. You don't have to come tomorrow, he said quietly. It's going to be hours of waiting, with nothing happening. I want to, Victoria replied, unless you'd rather I didn't. Jack shook his head. It's not that, it's just a lot to ask of anyone, let alone someone who's technically my boss. Is that what I am, Ariadne? Victoria asked. Your boss? Jack considered this. I don't know what you are, he admitted. Friend seems inadequate. Boss seems irrelevant. We don't really have a category for whatever this is. Do we need one? A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. I suppose not, but the world likes its neat labels and clear boundaries. The world will have to be disappointed, Victoria replied. I'll be here at 7 tomorrow morning. Do you need anything from your hotel? A change of clothes? Something to eat? Jack looked momentarily startled by the practical offer. No, thank you. The foundation arranged for a suite at the hotel across the street. They've thought of everything. Victoria nodded, careful to maintain her neutral expression. Good. Then I'll see you tomorrow. As she turned to leave, Jack called after her. Victoria? She looked back. Thank you, not just for coming, but for seeing us, really seeing us. The simple sincerity of his words stayed with her all the way back to her hotel. 7 o'clock the next morning found Victoria in the cardiac center's surgical waiting room, 2 cups of premium coffee in hand. Jack was already there, pacing the length of the empty room like a caged animal. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all. I brought coffee, Victoria said, offering him one of the cups. Real coffee, not the hospital version. Jack accepted it gratefully. Thanks. They took her in about 30 minutes ago. Dr. Matthews said they'll send updates every few hours, but it's going to be a long day. Then we'll wait together, Victoria said simply, setting her bag on one of the chairs. Jack's eyebrows rose slightly at the "we," but he didn't comment on it. They settled into adjacent chairs, Jack tense and upright, Victoria trying to project a calm she didn't entirely feel. She had brought work with her, reports to review, emails to answer, but left them in her bag for now. This wasn't the time for corporate matters. Have you eaten anything? She asked instead. Jack shook his head. Not hungry. You should eat anyway, Victoria insisted gently. It's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. You need to keep your strength up. After some persuasion, Jack agreed to visit the cafeteria. They found a quiet corner table, Jack picking at a breakfast sandwich while Victoria had yogurt and fruit. Around them, hospital staff and scrubs mingled with visitors and patients well enough to be mobile, creating a strange microcosm of humanity united by medical necessity. How did you and Sarah meet? Victoria asked, hoping to distract Jack from the clock watching she'd noticed him doing. The question seemed to catch him off guard, but after a moment he smiled faintly. Practice rooms at Eastman. I kept hearing this incredible Rachmaninoff coming from down the hall, the kind of playing that makes you stop and listen. I started scheduling my practice sessions to coincide with whoever was playing it. Sarah, Victoria guessed. Jack nodded. Sarah. She was a year ahead of me, already making a name for herself. I finally worked up the courage to introduce myself, and he laughed softly at the memory. She told me my Bach was too intellectual and needed more heart. Harsh, Victoria commented. Accurate, Jack corrected, and she offered to show me what she meant. We started practicing together, and eventually, he trailed off, his eyes distant. She was extraordinary, not just as a pianist, but as a person. She had this way of seeing into the heart of things, music, people, situations. Lily has that quality, Victoria observed, that insight beyond her years. Yes, Jack agreed, she does. It's one of the many ways she reminds me of her mother. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. Sarah would have been so proud of her. Terrified today, of course, but proud of how Lily's handling everything. Victoria hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since she'd first learned about Jack's past. Do you regret it, giving up your career after Sarah died? Jack was quiet for a long moment. People often assume I do, he said finally. They see it as a sacrifice, a tragedy even. The promising pianist reduced to cleaning floors. He shook his head. But it was never a choice, Victoria. Lily needed me, not just financially or logistically, but fully present. Being her father became more important than being a pianist. But you're still a pianist, Victoria pointed out. I've heard you play. Yes, he acknowledged, but not in the way I was before. Music is still part of me, but it's not my identity anymore. I'm Lily's father first. Everything else is secondary. Victoria considered this. That's a kind of courage I'm not sure I understand. To so completely reorient your life around someone else. It's not courage, Jack said. It's just love. The most ordinary kind of love there is, a parent for their child. They fell silent, the simple truth of his words hanging between them. Victoria thought about her own father, who had loved music more than anything, more than his family, certainly more than his daughter's happiness. William Reynolds had never reoriented his life for anyone. He had expected the world, including his family, to orient around him. I think it's extraordinary, she said finally, what most people would call ordinary love. Jack met her eyes, something unreadable in his expression. Thank you for seeing it that way. When they returned to the waiting room, which had begun to fill with other families waiting for their own news, the hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Jack alternated between sitting tensely and pacing the room. Victoria tried to provide distraction with conversation when he seemed receptive, quiet companionship when he didn't. At the 4-hour mark, a surgical nurse appeared with the first update. Lily was stable, the procedure progressing as expected. Jack visibly relaxed at this news, though the worried crease remained between his brows. 4 hours down, maybe 10 to go, he murmured, more to himself than to Victoria. Around noon, Victoria reluctantly pulled out her laptop. I need to check in on a few things, she explained, but I'll be right here. Jack nodded. Of course, you have a company to run. Don't let me keep you from anything important. Nothing is more important than being here today, Victoria replied simply, opening her email. Jack looked at her with surprise, then something like gratitude. They settled into a strange rhythm. Victoria working quietly, Jack alternating between reading a dog-eared paperback he'd brought and staring into space. Both of them alert for any appearance by hospital staff. Occasionally they would talk, the conversation meandering from music to books to childhood memories. Victoria learned that Jack had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the son of a high school music teacher who had recognized his talent early. He'd won his first piano competition at age 10, earned a scholarship to a prestigious arts high school, then another to Eastman. His path had seemed set: rising star, competition, circuit, international career, until life had intervened with Sarah's illness and death. In turn, Victoria shared stories of her own upbringing, the privilege and pressure of being William Reynolds' daughter, the constant expectation of excellence, the cold approval that was the closest her father ever came to expressing pride in her. He wasn't a warm man, she explained, but he was passionate about music. That passion was his form of love, I think. Did you ever consider defying him, Jack asked, continuing with piano despite his discouragement? Victoria shook her head. Not really. When William Reynolds declared something, it became reality. He said I didn't have what it took to be a professional pianist, so I didn't. I redirected all that discipline and focus into business instead. And now, do you still believe his assessment? Victoria considered the question. I don't know. I was good, but maybe not great. Not like you or Sarah, but I loved it. The focus, the emotional expression, the sense of connection with something larger than myself. I miss that sometimes. It's never too late, you know, Jack said quietly, to rediscover that connection. Victoria smiled faintly. Perhaps, but some paths, once abandoned, are difficult to find again. At the 8-hour mark, they received another update. The valve replacement was complete, but there were complications with the rhythm of Lily's heart. The surgeons were working to stabilize her before closing. Jack paled at this news, his hands clenching into fists. Complications, he repeated after the nurse had gone. That could mean anything. Dr. Matthews is the best, Victoria reminded him, and Lily is strong. Jack nodded mechanically, but she could see fear had overtaken him again. Without thinking, Victoria reached for his hand. He stiffened in surprise, then gradually relaxed, his fingers curling around hers. They sat like that, hand in hand, for nearly an hour, neither speaking, both drawing comfort from the simple human contact. When Jack finally pulled away, it was with a gentle squeeze of acknowledgement. Thank you, he said simply, for being here, for all of this. There's nowhere else I would be, Victoria replied, surprised to realize how true it was. At hour 11, Dr. Matthews himself appeared in the waiting room, still in surgical scrubs. Jack shot to his feet, Victoria rising more slowly beside him. Mr. Thompson, the surgeon said, his expression carefully neutral. Lily is stable. We've completed the valve replacement and addressed the rhythm issues we encountered. She's being transferred to the cardiac ICU now. So she's all right? Jack asked, his voice tight with restrained emotion. She's holding her own, Dr. Matthews replied. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical as her heart adapts to the new valve, but I'm cautiously optimistic. When can I see her? Jack asked. She'll be heavily sedated for at least 12 hours, but you can sit with her once she's settled in the ICU. The nurse will come get you when she's ready. After the surgeon left, Jack sank back into his chair, his face in his hands. His shoulders shook silently. Victoria sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his back, offering wordless support as he released the tension and fear of the past 11 hours. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, but his expression was composed. "She made it through," he said, his voice rough. "The first hurdle." "The first of many," Victoria acknowledged. "But she's strong, Jack, and she has you." "And apparently you," he added, with a hint of his dry humor returning. "CEO by day, hospital vigil keeper by night." Victoria smiled. "I'm versatile." The nurse arrived to escort Jack to the ICU, explaining that only immediate family could visit. Victoria stood, gathering her things. "I should go," she said. "You need time with Lily, and I need to check in at the office." Jack hesitated. "Will you come back? Tomorrow, maybe? Lily will want to see you when she's more awake." "Of course," Victoria promised. "Text me when she's up to visitors." As Jack turned to follow the nurse, Victoria impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "Jack, she's going to be all right." He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. "I know. Thank you, Victoria, for everything." Watching him walk away, Victoria felt an unexpected ache in her chest. She had come to Boston out of friendship, concern, perhaps curiosity. She was leaving with something far more complicated, a connection to Jack and Lily Thompson that defied the neat categories of her ordered life. As she drove back to her hotel, Victoria's phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Frank Porter's name appeared on the display. She briefly considered ignoring it, then sighed and accepted the call. "Frank, it's Sunday evening." "What's so urgent?" "Where are you, Victoria?" Frank's voice held the false concern that always preceded his most aggressive moves. "I've been trying to reach you all weekend." "I'm out of town on personal business," she replied coolly. "As I'm entitled to be. What do you need?" "The board has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. Your presence is required." Victoria felt a chill of premonition. "On what grounds has the board called an emergency session?" "New information has come to light regarding your association with certain employees. Information that raises serious questions about your judgment and leadership." Victoria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Is that so? And I suppose you're the source of this new information?" "I'm simply doing my duty to the company," Frank replied smoothly. "9 a.m. tomorrow, Victoria. Don't be late." The call disconnected, leaving Victoria with the hollow certainty that Frank had been building his case while she was distracted by Lily's surgery. Whatever he had discovered or manufactured was calculated to damage her position as CEO. She should be concerned, should be strategizing her defense. Instead, Victoria found herself thinking of Jack in the ICU with Lily, of the long road to recovery ahead for both of them. Compared to that, corporate politics seemed suddenly trivial. Victoria made a decision. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and called Margaret Wilson's private number. "Margaret, it's Victoria Reynolds. I apologize for calling on a Sunday evening, but I need your counsel." Victoria arrived at Reynolds Records the next morning precisely at 9, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit that projected authority and confidence. She had spent most of the night preparing, armed with the insights Margaret Wilson had provided and her own clear-eyed assessment of the situation. The boardroom fell silent as she entered. All 12 members were present, seated around the long table with Frank Porter at the far end, opposite her usual place at the head. Richard Reynolds, as chairman, sat to her right. "Good morning," Victoria said calmly, taking her seat. "I understand this is an emergency session." Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Yes, Victoria. Thank you for joining us on short notice." "Of course," she replied, "though I must admit, I'm curious about the nature of the emergency." Frank leaned forward. "The emergency, Victoria, is the discovery that you have used foundation funds established by your father for specific charitable purposes, to provide substantial financial support to an employee with whom you have developed an inappropriate personal relationship." A murmur went around the table. Victoria kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced. How had Frank discovered the foundation's grant to Lily? Those records were supposed to be confidential. "That's a serious allegation, Frank," she said evenly. "Perhaps you'd care to be more specific?" Frank slid a folder across the table. "The William Reynolds Foundation for Artists in Crisis recently approved a grant of $400,000 to cover medical expenses for Lily Thompson, daughter of Jack Thompson, the night janitor with whom you've been spending an unusual amount of time. The same Jack Thompson who was spotted playing your father's piano after hours. The same Jack Thompson whose home you visited and whom you invited to your private residence. Victoria opened the folder to find copies of the Foundation's grant documents, along with surveillance photos of her with Jack at the community center, at the ice cream parlor, and even entering the hospital in Boston. "You've been having me followed," she stated flatly. "The board authorized discreet monitoring when concerns about your judgment first arose," Richard interjected. "For your own protection, Victoria." "I see." Victoria closed the folder. "And what exactly am I being accused of? Helping the talented daughter of a former concert pianist receive medical care? Supporting a child with a life-threatening heart condition? You're being accused of misusing foundation funds to benefit someone with whom you have a personal relationship," Frank stated. "A clear conflict of interest, and of exercising poor judgment in developing that relationship in the first place." Victoria looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. The William Reynolds Foundation operates independently from Reynolds Records. As chairperson of that foundation, I have full authority to direct its grants as I see fit, in accordance with its mission. The fact that Lily Thompson's father happens to work at Reynolds Records is irrelevant to her qualifications as a recipient. "Irrelevant," Frank scoffed. "You specifically directed that grant to the daughter of a man you've been seen with repeatedly outside of work hours. A man whose position as night janitor puts him directly under your authority. If that's not a conflict of interest, I don't know what is." Victoria turned to Margaret Wilson, who sat watching the exchange with shrewd eyes. "Margaret, you're on the Foundation's board as well. Perhaps you could illuminate the decision-making process that led to Lily Thompson's grant." Margaret nodded, picking up the cue smoothly. "The Foundation's board reviewed extensive documentation of Lily Thompson's musical talent and medical needs. We were particularly impressed by her connection to Jay Thompson, a pianist William himself had mentored briefly. The grant was approved unanimously by all board members, myself included." "And was Victoria's relationship with Jack Thompson discussed during those deliberations?" Frank pressed. "Ms. Reynolds recused herself from the final vote, citing a potential appearance of conflict," Margaret replied calmly. "The rest of the board determined that the grant was fully in line with the Foundation's mission, regardless of any professional connection between Miss Reynolds and Mr. Thompson." Victoria gave Margaret a small nod of thanks. The older woman had understood exactly what Victoria needed and had prepared accordingly. "So you see, Frank," Victoria continued, "proper protocols were followed. The grant was awarded on merit, with full disclosure and recusal where appropriate." "That addresses the Foundation issue," Richard acknowledged, "but not the question of your personal involvement with this employee." "My personal time is my own," Victoria stated firmly. "Jack Thompson is a talented musician who once studied with my father. His daughter is a gifted young pianist. I've taken an interest in them for those reasons. There is nothing inappropriate about that interest." "You've been to Boston to visit them in the hospital," Frank pointed out. "That goes beyond professional courtesy." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "I went to Boston to support a child undergoing life-threatening surgery and her father who was facing it alone. If the board considers basic human compassion to be incompatible with my role as CEO, then perhaps we have different visions for this company." A silence fell over the room. Victoria could see the board members exchanging glances, reassessing the situation now that she had defended herself so forcefully. "No one is questioning your compassion, Victoria," Richard said finally. "But there are concerns about perception, about maintaining appropriate boundaries." "I understand those concerns," Victoria replied. "But I would remind the board that my father built this company on personal relationships and human connections. He believed music was about bringing people together, not enforcing arbitrary divisions based on job titles or social status." She leaned forward, her voice growing more passionate. "Jack Thompson is an extraordinary pianist who gave up a promising career to raise his daughter after his wife died. Lily Thompson is a remarkably talented young musician who may never reach her full potential because of a heart condition that threatens her life. If showing interest in their situation somehow damages the company's image, then perhaps we need to reconsider what kind of company we want to be." Another silence, longer this time. Victoria could sense the mood shifting, board members reconsidering their positions in light of her impassioned defense. Frank, however, was not finished. This isn't just about compassion or musical appreciation, Victoria. Your judgment has been compromised. You've been distracted, making decisions based on personal feelings rather than business considerations. The company deserves leadership that is focused solely on its best interests. And you believe you can provide that leadership, Frank? Victoria asked directly. Frank didn't flinch. I believe I can provide the stability and focus that Reynolds Records needs right now, yes. Victoria nodded slowly. I thought as much, which brings me to something I discovered during my own investigation this weekend. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder of her own, sliding it toward Richard. Bank records showing regular meetings between Frank Porter and executives from Meridian Global over the past 6 months. Emails discussing the potential sale of Reynolds Records following a change in leadership. A draft contract with a substantial consulting fee for Frank following the completion of said sale. The board erupted in murmurs as Richard opened the folder, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. Is this true, Frank? He demanded. Frank's face had gone pale. Those are preliminary discussions only, exploratory conversations about potential future scenarios. Scenarios in which you orchestrate my removal and then sell my father's company to our largest competitor, Victoria summarized coldly, while arranging a comfortable retirement for yourself. That's a gross mischaracterization, Frank protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Victoria turned back to the board. So we have two issues before us. My alleged conflict of interest in helping a talented young musician receive medical care, and Frank's documented efforts to undermine my leadership in order to sell this company against the express wishes of my father and this board's previous resolutions. She stood, gathering her things. I'll leave you to discuss both matters privately. But before I go, let me be clear. I am proud of my decision to help Lily Thompson. I am proud of my friendship with Jack Thompson. And I am proud of the way I've led this company for the past 5 years. If the board feels otherwise, I'll accept your decision. But I will not apologize for seeing value in people regardless of their title or position. With that, Victoria walked out, closing the door firmly behind her as she made her way to her office, heart pounding but head high. Whatever happened next, she had spoken her truth. An hour later, her phone buzzed with a text from Jack. Lily's awake and asking for you. When you have time, no rush. Victoria smiled at the message, a sense of perspective washing over her. Board politics, corporate maneuvering, Frank Porter's machinations, none of it mattered compared to the simple fact that Lily Thompson was awake after her surgery. She was about to reply when her office door opened and Richard Reynolds entered, followed by Margaret Wilson. The board has reached a decision, Richard announced without preamble. Victoria straightened, preparing herself for whatever came next. I'm listening. Frank Porter has been removed from his position, effective immediately, Richard stated. His actions constitute a clear breach of fiduciary duty in violation of his employment contract. Victoria blinked in surprise. And the other matter? My alleged conflict of interest? Margaret smiled. The board has determined that your personal relationships are your own business, provided they don't interfere with your duties as CEO, which by all objective measures, they have not. I see, Victoria said, relief washing through her. Thank you for your confidence. Richard shifted uncomfortably. There is one more thing, Victoria. The board would appreciate discretion in your ongoing relationship with the Thompsons. Not because there's anything improper, but because perception matters, Victoria finished for him. I understand. After they left, Victoria sat for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. Then she picked up her phone and replied to Jack's text. On my way, just need to tie up a few loose ends here first. Some things she was learning were worth fighting for, worth risking her carefully constructed professional image, worth standing up to the board, worth challenging the artificial boundaries that separated people based on title or position. Jack and Lily Thompson were teaching her that lesson, though they would never know the battle she had just fought on their behalf. As she gathered her things to return to Boston, Victoria found herself humming the melody from Heartstrings, the unfinished composition that Jack was now completing. It seemed fitting somehow. Like the piece itself, her life had taken an unexpected turn, venturing into harmonies more complex and emotionally rich than she had allowed herself to experience in years. Some compositions deserved an ending, even after years of silence. And perhaps some people deserved a second chance at the music they had abandoned long ago.